The story begins with confusion washing over Bernard Orlean as he finds himself pierced by a glare of utter hostility. The woman before him, Lady Agnes Liverge, stares him down with sharp, narrowed eyes, her expression radiating a visceral grudge that leaves him bewildered. He racks his brain, searching for a cause, but comes up empty. This moment marks their very first meeting, yet she looks at him as though he is a lifelong enemy. The narrative rewinds to the source of this tension, transporting the scene back to a glittering debut ball held 5 years prior. The grand hall overflows with the murmurs of high society, chandeliers casting a warm glow over the assembled nobility. Bernard stands amidst the crowd, feeling a surge of disbelief at his own presence. He considers it a stroke of immense luck to attend Lady Agnes's debut ball, an event that represents the pinnacle of high society. Beside him, his companion Julian barely contains his excitement, marveling at the attendance of such illustrious figures. Julian eagerly educates Bernard on the significance of the night, declaring Agnes Liverge the ultimate prize. He argues that for nobles of the second rank or lower, like themselves, there could be no better match. Marriage to her, he insists, would signify reaching the absolute summit of success in life. He describes Agnes with reverence, noting she is the only daughter of the famous Count Liverge and is celebrated in society as the radiant rose of beauty. Bernard, however, listens with a detached, cynical expression. He dismisses Julian's fantasies, retorting that he could not care less about such unattainable prospects. Undeterred, Julian presses on, reminding Bernard that they are official knights now, a status that granted them their invitation to the royal court ball. Bernard counters with grim realism. He argues that their new title does nothing to bridge the gap between them and the daughter of a high-ranking noble. He identifies himself as merely the fifth son of a countryside noble, convinced that a woman of Agnes's stature would never even consider marrying someone of his insignificance. Julian laughs off Bernard's pessimism, apologizing if he caused offense, but then points out the irony of Bernard's name. He notes that Bernard literally means strong, yet the man himself is perpetually hesitating. Bernard's mind drifts to the origins of his name and the burden of his lineage. He recalls that the Orlean family governs a rural town far from the capital, holding the modest title of Viscount. His father, having exhausted his repertoire of noble names like Louis, Robert, Victor, and Mathilde on his first 4 children, ran out of ideas by the time his 5th son arrived. Resigned, he named the boy Bernard, a name associated with the strength of a bear. This earned Bernard the nickname Bear Man among his peers, a moniker that mocked his social clumsiness. He reflects on his disastrous history at social gatherings, where his attempts to mingle always ended in failure. He accepts the harsh truth that money is the decisive factor in marriage. As a 5th son who inherited almost nothing, owning only a small manor on the outskirts of town, he understands exactly why he has faced countless rejections. Julian interrupts Bernard's internal brooding, dragging him forward to greet Agnes. Bernard resists, stammering, but Julian insists, claiming it is only proper manners to greet her politely. Bernard steels himself, taking pride in his honor as a knight, the one thing he truly possesses. He reasons that there is nothing shameful about his birth or life and decides to get the formality over with. He reassures himself that a high-ranking noblewoman like Agnes must be accustomed to greeting lesser nobles and will likely pay him no mind. However, the moment they come face to face, Bernard's expectations shatter. Agnes does not offer a polite, indifferent nod. Instead, she fixes him with a look of intense, unexplained hatred. Her eyes bore into him, filled with a disdain that freezes him in his tracks. He stands paralyzed, unable to comprehend why she looks at him as if he were a sworn enemy when they have never exchanged a single word. The timeline jumps forward 1 year. The setting shifts to a sunny afternoon where Bernard stands guard, looking utterly bored. His colleague, observing Bernard's apathy, deduces that he lacks motivation for the work. Bernard complains about the pointlessness of guarding the second prince at a mere tea party. His partner teases him, suggesting that Bernard only volunteered for the shift because he heard Lady Agnes would be in attendance. The accusation flusters Bernard, who vehemently denies the claim. Desperate to escape the conversation and the memories of that humiliating night at the ball, Bernard announces he will patrol the rose garden. As he walks away, he tries to convince himself that he had forgotten about Agnes completely and that she has nothing to do with him anymore. He seeks solitude to clear his head, but his peace is short-lived. A cloying, overly affectionate voice drifts through the hedges, calling out for a sweet little darling. Bernard rounds a corner and stumbles upon a disturbing scene. A man is chasing Agnes through the garden, treating her distress as a playful game of tag. Agnes looks terrified, cornered by the unwanted advances. Bernard, misinterpreting the dynamic at first, sighs at the childishness of a man and woman playing tag in a rose garden. He steps out from the shadows, calling out Agnes's name with a tone of exasperation. Agnes gasps, turning to see Bernard. She looks shocked, her face flushing. Bernard apologizes for the interruption, stating he didn't mean to disturb their game. He turns to leave, assuming he has walked in on a private lover's quarrel. Panic seizes Agnes. She cries out, begging the Sir Knight to wait. Bernard pauses, looking back with cold indifference, attempting to excuse himself once more. Desperation overtakes her, and she pleads with him to save her. Before Bernard can react, the pursuer bursts through the bushes. It is a man named Ernest, one of the prince's personal guards. He spots Agnes and lunges for her with a maniacal grin, shouting, "My kitten!" Agnes recoils, clinging to Bernard for protection. Ernest ignores Bernard's presence, focused entirely on his prey. Bernard recognizes Ernest and his expression darkens. He confronts the man, asking if this is really the time to abandon his post to chase women. Ernest, unashamed, claims he was just having a good time with his sweetheart and demands to know why Bernard is ruining the moment. Bernard does not budge. He holds his ground, shielding the trembling Agnes behind him. He declares that helping the weak, respecting virtue, and crushing evil is the true spirit of chivalry. With a swift, silent intimidation, Bernard subdues Ernest. The narrative implies a physical altercation or an overwhelming aura of threat, as the next image shows Ernest scrambling away in terror, shouting for Bernard to stop. Bernard watches him flee, his eyes narrowing with contempt. He then turns his attention to Agnes, who is still shaken. He maintains a professional, albeit cold, distance. He informs her that he must return to his duties but offers her a safe haven. He points towards a small wing of the estate, describing a cottage owned by an elderly gardener couple where she can hide. He advises her sternly not to return to the main party until she has calmed down. Agnes watches him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and gratitude, but Bernard notices that even now, she looks at him with that same complex expression. 3 years drift by. The scene shifts to a winter night in the capital. Bernard stands in uniform, looking at the illuminated castle. He reflects on the passage of time, noting that he has spent these years diligently fulfilling his duties as a knight. He has hardened his heart, resolving never to get involved with Agnes again. He recalls his confusion over her angry glares but dismisses it, focusing on his reality. Tonight, he is assigned to security for the royal ball, having refused to attend as a guest. He monitors the perimeter, tasked with catching anyone sneaking out. He watches couples and nobles, reaffirming his belief that he lacks the money to support a noblewoman as a wife anyway. He resigns himself to doing his boring task quietly and without complaint. Memory blurs with the present as Bernard recalls another encounter with Agnes during one of these shifts. She had tried to approach him, looking distressed, pleading for him to wait. He had shut her down immediately, citing that the area was off-limits and ordering her to return to the ballroom. She had tried to explain something, her face full of urgency, but he cut her off, refusing to accept any excuses. He remembers thinking that whatever she did or whoever she met was none of his concern. He assumes she will marry soon, yet a strange detail nags at him. He has heard not a single rumor about her engagement. Inside the guard quarters, the narrative catches up to the present timeline. Bernard reads a book while his colleagues gossip. They discuss Agnes, noting with surprise that she is 18 and still unmarried. Rumors fly about rejected proposals from the second prince and the Grand Duke's eldest son. They speculate that her father, the Prime Minister, is being overly cautious about choosing a husband. Bernard ignores the chatter until a colleague, Orlean, teases him. The colleague points out that Bernard has been promoted to vice-captain and has a steady salary, suggesting it is time he settled down. Bernard brushes off the comment, but the banter is silenced by the arrival of Captain Lazar. Captain Lazar enters with a grim expression, announcing an urgent assignment despite the squad's fatigue from the night shift. He reveals the mission is to assist in the confiscation of a noble's property. When asked for the target, Lazar names Gerard de Liverge, Agnes's father. The room erupts in shock. Lazar explains that no matter the rank, embezzlement of state funds is an unforgivable crime. Bernard freezes, processing the news that the Liverge family, the pinnacle of the aristocracy, is about to fall. The narrative summarizes the aftermath. Shortly after the raid, the Liverge family collapses completely. By royal decree, they are stripped of their status. Another year passes, yet the scandal remains the talk of the capital. Gossipmongers relish the details, focusing particularly on Lady Agnes. They whisper about how her fair-weather friends abandoned her the moment her family fell, leaving her with no one. Rumors circulate that she visits her imprisoned father every single day without fail, while others claim she is homeless, living in a cheap inn. Bernard sits in a mess hall, listening to the cruelty of society. His friend Julian, once Agnes's biggest admirer, now speaks of the situation with cold detachment. He remarks that no one wants personal ties to such a disgraced household, as it would hurt one's reputation. Bernard challenges him, asking why he doesn't marry her now and save her himself. Julian recoils, calling the idea impossible and citing his own need to survive in society. Bernard stares into his soup, his cynical worldview confirmed once again. In the end, he muses, everyone judges solely by lineage and wealth. Later that evening, Bernard leaves the castle in civilian clothes. Captain Lazare catches him, teasingly asking if he is all dressed up for a date. Bernard denies it, explaining he has just gotten used to reporting in plain clothes. He bids the captain good night and exits the gates. Outside, he notices a commotion. Guards are blocking a hooded figure who is demanding entry. One guard informs Bernard that the woman claims she wishes to meet him. Bernard sighs, assuming it is some lady chasing after a knight she fancies, and approaches to resolve the disturbance. As he draws closer, the woman lowers her hood. Bernard stops dead. It is Agnes Lyverge. She looks nothing like the radiant noblewoman of the past. She wears worn clothes and looks exhausted. The guards, realizing the two know each other, awkwardly excuse themselves, leaving Bernard alone with the fallen noblewoman. Bernard stares at her, his mind racing. He asks what she is doing there. Agnes confirms her identity, her voice trembling. Bernard's suspicion flares. He accuses her of coming to vent her resentment because his squad was among those who seized her estate. He doubts she came for any personal reason, convinced she still looks down on him. He interprets her gaze as the same angry glare she gave him years ago. Agnes denies his accusation, but Bernard is already formulating a response. He looks at her tattered appearance and remembers the coldness she showed him when he saved her. A dark thought crosses his mind, perhaps a little payback wouldn't hurt. He decides to test her, to humble the woman who always looked at him with disdain. He interrupts her explanation, pointing out that she has no family to rely on and no place to go. He makes a shocking offer. He will hire her as his maid. Agnes looks up, stunned. Bernard presses on, asking if she is serious about her situation. He promises that he won't let her suffer in terms of food or lodging, but demands she decide immediately. He admits internally that it is a cruel offer, born from years of suppressed feelings bursting out at once. He expects her to be humiliated, to reject his pity. Instead, Agnes reaches into her cloak. She reveals a small basket, explaining that before his offer, she had come to give him a token of gratitude. She confesses the truth. She has run out of money to survive and was on her way to a pawnshop to sell her mother's only keepsake. Tears well up in her eyes, not of humiliation, but of overwhelming relief. She clutches her chest and bows deeply, thanking him profusely. She declares she will work with all her strength and utmost sincerity to repay his kindness. Bernard stands frozen, his plan to humble her backfiring completely. He stares at the weeping woman, the former radiant rose of beauty, who now pledges herself to his service with genuine gratitude. He is left grappling with the surreal reality that Lady Agnes Lyverge has just become his maid, and he has no idea how their lives ended up intertwined in such a drastic reversal of fortune. A month has dissolved into history since the arrest of Minister Lyverge, leaving behind a residue of scandal and ruin. The rattling of carriage wheels against uneven cobblestones fills the silence as Bernard Orleans sits opposite Agnes Lyverge. She gazes out the window, her expression hollow, living a life that stands in stark, brutal contrast to the opulent existence she once knew as a noble lady. Bernard watches her, his mind grappling with the reality of her fall, unable to reconcile the image of the proud woman he knew with the figure sitting before him. The carriage clatters to a halt in front of a dilapidated structure known as the Wild Goat Inn. The building leans wearily, its timber frame looking as though it might surrender to gravity at any moment. Bernard steps out, surveying the shabby surroundings with a critical eye, noting that he never expected her to be hiding in such a rundown location. He finds it jarring that a woman of her former stature would be reduced to washing dishes and cleaning rooms in a place where the laundry hangs haphazardly from the windows. Agnes steps down, clutching her bag, and admits that she is still unaccustomed to the manual labor required to survive here. She attempts to lift her heavy suitcase, determined to carry her own burden. Bernard intervenes immediately, his hand reaching out to take the handle. She protests, insisting she can manage, but he cuts through her refusal with pragmatic logic. He states that if he waits for her to walk slowly while struggling with the weight, they will not arrive until after nightfall. Without waiting for further argument, he hoists the luggage and begins to walk, instructing her to follow. He informs her that they will take a transport carriage from here to the neighboring town, where his house is located just a short distance away. Agnes follows, murmuring a quiet thanks, noting that he is surprisingly strict with himself. They arrive at their destination, a sturdy stone mansion that speaks of respectable, if not extravagant, nobility. Bernard announces that this is his home. Agnes gazes up at the structure, her eyes widening as she takes in the architectural details, the arched windows, and the well-tended grounds. She whispers that it is a beautiful mansion, her voice tinged with genuine admiration. Bernard opens the heavy wooden doors and steps into the foyer, announcing his return. He calls out for Jigel. A woman with a warm, motherly demeanor appears, welcoming him home with a bright smile. She immediately notices Agnes standing behind him and clasps her hands together in delight, exclaiming that a miracle has happened. She shouts for her son, Eric, urging him to come quickly. Eric, the head butler, rushes onto the scene, his face lighting up with excitement. He stares at Agnes, misinterpreting the situation entirely. He marvels that his master, who has never had a trace of a woman in his life, has finally brought one home. He begs Bernard to introduce him to the lovely young lady, assuming she is a romantic interest. Bernard shatters the butler's fantasy with a blunt correction, stating that she is not a young lady in that sense, but rather the new maid. Eric's jaw drops, a sound of pure shock escaping him as his romantic assumptions crumble. Bernard proceeds with the formal introductions, presenting Jigel Balzac as the head of housekeeping and Eric as her son. Agnes bows politely, introducing herself as Agnes Liverch. Jigel looks at her with deep sympathy, recognizing her as the young lady from the bankrupt noble family that has been the subject of so much gossip. She observes that despite Agnes's beauty and noble birth, she possesses a kindness that allows her to bow respectfully even to servants. Jigel turns her gaze to Bernard, her expression turning sly. She teases him, suggesting that he must be thinking Agnes is just a servant now. She presses him, whispering that if he knows how desperate Agnes is, he should just ask her to marry him instead of making her work. Bernard flushes, stammering that she is saying unnecessary things. Jigel laughs off her own comment, claiming she was just kidding, but adds that she hopes Agnes will stay with the master forever. Agnes, humble and earnest, bows again to the staff, stating that she is inexperienced but hopes they will accept her. Jigel assures her that they are delighted to have her join them. She then points toward the garden, introducing her husband, Dominic Balzac, the gardener. Agnes peers out the window and comments that Dominic looks like a bear. Jigel laughs, revealing a piece of history. In the past, her husband was called the Big Bear, while Bernard was nicknamed the Little Bear. Bernard panics, trying to stop the story, but it is too late. Jigel apologizes playfully, noting that the master is still a bit childish about the nickname. As the introductions settle, Jigel explains the current state of the household staff. Just 2 months prior, her eldest daughter, Anna, got married and left the house, leaving a vacancy that they are grateful Agnes can fill. She lists the other servants, Carol and Syria, the 2 maids who handle manual chores, and the second son, Alan, who is in charge of the kitchen. In total, there are 6 servants, almost all from the same Balzac family. Jigel outlines the layout of the mansion. The first floor contains the dining hall, bath, kitchen, and laundry room. The second floor is the master's domain, and the third floor is reserved for the servants. Jigel leads Agnes to the 3rd floor, showing her to the room that used to belong to Anna. She apologizes in advance for the dust, explaining that the room has been neglected. As they enter, Agnes coughs slightly, acknowledging that there is indeed more dust than expected. Bernard stands by the door, apologizing for the state of the room and asking for her forgiveness regarding Eric's earlier eccentricity, assuring her that the boy is good at his job. Agnes smiles gently, assuring him that it is fine. She looks around the dusty space and declares it a lovely room, comparing it to the ones found in fairy tales. She rolls up her sleeves, determined to clean it and make it beautiful again. Bernard retreats to his office on a lower floor, collapsing onto a sofa with a heavy sigh. He covers his face with his hand, questioning how he ended up in this situation. His mind drifts back to the moment she thanked him. He recalls her bowing to him, her voice filled with a gratitude that sounded completely genuine. He admits to himself that when he offered her the position of maid, it was an act born mostly of stubbornness and a desire for petty retribution. He remembers their very first meeting 5 years ago, how she had looked at him with what he perceived as disdain. He wrestles with his own perceptions. He wonders if he was wrong about her all along. The woman he sees now seems like a completely different person from the haughty noble he thought he knew. Yet, he cannot shake the memory of that glare from 5 years ago, unable to believe he imagined such hostility. He paces the room, his thoughts turning to the employment contract he needs to prepare. He questions if he rushed into this decision but realizes that taking back his word now would be wrong. He thinks of Agnes, once admired and pampered by everyone, now reduced to this. The more he contemplates her fall, the more puzzling it becomes. He looks upward, wondering what his father would have said in times like this. A memory surfaces, clear and commanding. He recalls the code of chivalry: help the weak, respect courtesy, and defeat evil. The image of Agnes flashes in his mind, trembling, dressed in shabby clothes unbefitting her noble past. His resolve hardens. He decides that protecting her is what a true knight should do. He calls out to a servant to bring Agnes to him so they can sign the contract immediately. Agnes enters the room quietly, answering his summons. Bernard observes her as she stands by the door, noting again how fragile she appears. He reaffirms his internal vow to protect her. He gestures toward the seating area and tells her to sit down. Agnes, misinterpreting his gesture, walks over and sits right next to him on the sofa, rather than in the chair across from him. Bernard flushes, panic rising in his chest. He screams internally, asking why she is sitting there of all places. He realizes she thought he pointed to that specific spot. He tries to compose himself, telling himself that worrying about where she sits is a trivial matter. However, his heart betrays him, beating rapidly in his chest. He attempts to maintain his composure, telling her it is fine and to stay where she is. He steals a glance at her profile, realizing how close she is. He reflects on the fact that he has been so busy fulfilling his knightly duties that he hasn't interacted with a woman his own age in years. He has known Jigel's daughters since they were children, so he never viewed them as women in this way. Agnes's proximity affects him more than he expects, his heart aching with a strange, unfamiliar tension. He hands her the employment contract, instructing her to read it carefully before deciding. Agnes accepts the paper, thanking him. She squints at the document, leaning in even closer to him. She apologizes, stating she cannot see the text clearly. Bernard recoils slightly, overwhelmed by her nearness, and snaps that she is too close and can hold the paper herself. Agnes pulls back, apologizing profusely, flustered by his reaction. She focuses on the paper, her expression turning serious as she reads through the terms. Bernard watches her, his anxiety spiking again. He thinks about the low salary he can offer as a poor knight and the uncomfortable living conditions of his home. He braces himself for her refusal. Agnes finishes reading and looks up, stating simply that she has finished. Bernard speaks formally, stating that if she has no issues with the contents, she should write her name at the bottom of the page. He adds that if she has no objections, he looks forward to working with her. Agnes does not hesitate. She takes the pen and signs her name, Agnes Liverge, in elegant script at the bottom of the contract, sealing her fate as the maid of the Orlean household. The deal is struck, binding the fallen noblewoman to the knight who once thought he despised her. Bernard Orlean sits in the dining parlor, his arms crossed and his posture stiff. He calls out to the head housekeeper, feigning a casual tone while asking the whereabouts of that person. Jigel, the housekeeper, pours tea with a knowing calmness, deliberately playing dumb to provoke him. She offers the names of the other maids, Carol or Syria, forcing Bernard to break his facade and admit he is asking for Agnes. Jigel reveals that Agnes is working a late shift today, scheduled from the afternoon until night. Bernard scoffs, masking his disappointment with disdain, remarking that employing someone like her is pointless and asserting she won't be of much use anyway. Jigel sees right through his abrasive deflection, noting with a sly smile that he says things he does not mean. The atmosphere shifts as Bernard's attention turns to the daily newspaper sprawling across the table. The headlines scream the name of Gerard de Liverge, Agnes's father, who dominates the front page once again. The article details the first hearing of the former Prime Minister, who stands trial for violating the National Capital Regulation Act. The text emphasizes the severity of the situation, noting that the king himself attended the trial, a rare and ominous occurrence that signals the monarch's profound anger. The report describes how the trust built over years collapsed in an instant, leading the surrounding nobles to abandon the Liverge family to protect their own interests. Bernard reads the grim account, his hand clenching around the paper until he crumples it into a ball, muttering his disgust at the fickle nature of the nobility. Later, at the knight's headquarters, the air buzzes with the rhythmic sounds of training and the murmurs of soldiers on break. The men discuss the king's ruthless approach to seizing critical positions and subduing criminals, agreeing that such harshness is natural for the leader of the realm. They pivot to discussing Bernard, noting that the deputy commander was unusually strict during the morning drills. They marvel at his success, leading the elite 3rd Special Assault Battalion at such a young age, viewing him as a man destined for greatness. The conversation among the soldiers inevitably drifts toward the scandalous Liverge family. They recount that Agnes's mother passed away years ago and speculate on Agnes's current fate. The soldiers speak with cruel pragmatism, agreeing that no one would be crazy enough to protect the daughter of a family that angered the king, as it would ensure their own professional ruin. Bernard stands nearby, overhearing their hushed gossip. The soldiers lower their voices further, sharing rumors from the investigation department that suggest a darker fate for the fallen noblewoman. They theorize that someone might be plotting to make Agnes a mistress, hiding her away to avoid punishment. Bernard interrupts, clearing his throat loudly to signal his presence, asking if he has done something strange to merit their whispering. The soldiers, unaware of Bernard's personal connection, continue their speculation. They paint a horrific picture, suggesting that given her beauty, she might not remain just a mistress but could be sold into the underworld, gambling halls, drug smuggling rings, or slave trading. They theorize she will vanish into the criminal underbelly. Bernard's expression hardens. He declares that nobles who stain their hands with crime should be expelled from the capital and reminds his men that their unit's mission is to suppress criminal activity. Desperate to justify his desire to keep Agnes close, Bernard concocts a ludicrous proposal on the spot. He suggests asking Agnes to cooperate with them in a secret investigation to root out these underworld threats. His subordinate stares at him, baffled by the leap in logic. Bernard attempts to look profound, quoting a foreign philosopher, "Silence is golden and speech is silver," to deflect the scrutiny. The subordinate dismantles the idea immediately, pointing out that such an operation would require the king's direct permission. He reminds Bernard that the king gets furious at the mere mention of the name Liverge, making such a request impossible. He adds that the king has been acting as if nothing happened, continuing his duties, and reveals that it was actually a stand-in who attended the trial, not the king himself. Defeated by logic, Bernard returns to his mansion. Eric welcomes him home, but Bernard rushes past, intent on seeing Agnes. He finds her carrying a tea set, dressed in the maid uniform he provided. He halts, struck by a realization that dismantles his previous strategy. He had hoped the servant's outfit would help her hide completely, rendering her invisible to society. Instead, the uniform does nothing to diminish her presence. She looks like a stunning beauty in a costume, drawing more attention rather than less. Bernard panics, realizing he needs to make her wear something less attention-grabbing. He approaches her abruptly, reaching out to adjust her coat. He moves too quickly, invading her personal space. Agnes freezes, and Bernard realizes his error as he looms over her. He stammers an apology, retreating rapidly while admitting he is too close. He tries to mask his flustered state by pivoting back to the topic of her schedule, asking what comes next. He attempts to regain his authority as her master, asking if she would prefer to bathe first or eat. The domesticity of the question hangs in the air. Behind him, Jigel and Eric snicker, visualizing the scenario through a romantic lens rather than a master-servant dynamic. Bernard catches Jigel's amused expression and realizes he is being mocked. The light mood shatters as a heavy rainstorm begins to batter the mansion. Water begins to drip from the ceiling. The maids, Carol and Syria, rush in with urgent news. The 3rd floor is leaking. They report that the hail from earlier in the day likely damaged the roof. The leak is severe. While previous leaks never reached the lower floors, this time the water is pouring in, threatening the integrity of the 100-year-old mansion. They reveal that the attic room, Agnes's room, is completely flooded. Bernard issues rapid orders, telling the maids to take emergency measures. He assigns the 3rd floor to Jigel and runs toward the attic, realizing that Agnes is in danger of getting hurt. Bernard bursts into the attic room to find Agnes standing amidst the deluge. The room is soaked, the water falling like a light drizzle inside the house. Alan, the chef, inspects the damage and delivers a grim prognosis. Fixing the boards from the inside is useless. To save the mansion from flooding, someone must go out onto the roof, remove the broken tiles, and fasten boards over the breach. The staff hesitates. The storm is raging, and the forest creates a barrier that prevents a carpenter from arriving. Alan volunteers, but others point out that his heavy frame might cause the roof to collapse. Dominic is suggested, but Bernard cuts through the debate. He declares that he will go himself, citing his experience with heights from his time at the Knight's headquarters. Bernard takes command, ordering the staff to the first floor to catch the water and mop the floors. The staff protest the danger, but he silences them, instructing them to stay calm and bring him a lantern. He climbs out into the storm, slipping slightly on the slick tiles. On the roof, Bernard works furiously against the elements. He calls out for more boards, securing them over the shattered tiles. He notices the damage is extensive, with tiles broken in several places. He shouts for the team to close the gap quickly as water continues to leak into the room. As he works, he notices someone near him trembling and asks if they are cold. Bernard finishes the repair and climbs back inside, drenched and exhausted. He looks at Agnes, who is kneeling on the floor, also soaked to the bone. He asks why she is in such a terrible state. Giles steps forward to explain that it was Agnes who was carrying the heavy boards for him during the repair. Bernard looks at Agnes with fresh eyes. He realizes that when he saw her trembling on the roof, it wasn't from the cold, but from the sheer physical exertion of hauling the lumber to assist him. He is struck by her resilience. He dismisses the topic with a gruff acceptance, telling her, "Good work." Recovering his authority, Bernard orders everyone to step back. He instructs Giles, Carol, Syria, and Agnes to go change their clothes immediately to avoid getting sick, stating that the men will handle the rest of the cleaning. The maids cheer, thanking him profusely for his consideration. In the background, Eric and Giles exchange knowing smirks, delighted by their master's protective behavior. Bernard notices their expressions and grumpily asks what is wrong, to which they reply, "Nothing," with teasing innocence. Bernard turns to Agnes, ordering her to go change as a command from her master, desperate to end the awkward moment and hide his concern. Agnes smiles, bowing as she obeys. The storm has passed, leaving the Orleans manor in a state of damp, expensive silence. The immediate crisis of the leak has been stemmed, ensuring that no further rain breaches the interior. However, the aftermath presents a grim reality for Bernard Orleans. He stands in the hallway, receiving the report that while the emergency measures held, the damage is extensive. The guest room has been temporarily assigned to Agnes Liverge, a necessary displacement as the upstairs room, her former quarters, took the brunt of the storm's fury. The dampness has rendered the attic uninhabitable, and the floorboards themselves must be ripped up and replaced. Bernard winces as the financial toll mounts in his mind. The temporary roof requires a complete rebuild. He tries to push the thought of repair costs away, but a more pressing concern demands his attention: Agnes's health. The ordeal in the rain has taken a severe toll on her fragile constitution, and she has fallen ill with a cold. Her body, soaked to the bone during her desperate efforts to help him repair the roof, has succumbed to fever. Maids Syria and Carol are currently attending to her, but Bernard knows amateur care is insufficient. He collapses onto a sofa, staring at the ceiling in frustration. He realizes he cannot leave a sick person unattended and resolves to call a doctor. Yet, this decision carries a heavy risk. No one from outside the mansion can be allowed to see Agnes's face, lest the rumors of her presence ignite an uproar that the household cannot contain. He issues strict instructions to his staff: summon a doctor, but ensure his silence with a bribe. The litany of expenses, repair costs, treatment costs, hush money, spirals through Bernard's mind, a heavy burden for a poor knight to bear. Rumors of the Liverge scandal continue to swirl through the capital, reaching even the knight's headquarters. Bernard sits at his desk, his expression darkening as he reads a tabloid newspaper that screams the headline, "The whole truth, told by those close to her." The article claims to expose the lavish life and reckless love affairs of the former count's daughter. It paints a portrait of a villainess who fired maids over trivialities like the wrong dress and refused to wear anything but the finest fabrics. The text alleges she is a corrupt woman of indulgence, changing lovers every year, and that her title as the Radiant Rose was nothing more than an illusion bought with money. Bernard listens as soldiers nearby gossip, devouring the sensationalist trash. They mock her fall, claiming she brought it upon herself and labeling her the lowest, worst kind of woman. Disgust rises in Bernard's throat. He hands the paper to his subordinate, ordering him to dispose of it. He admits to himself that despite living with her, he still does not truly know Agnes at all. The disparity between the villainess in the papers and the woman who worked herself to exhaustion on his roof gnaws at him. He resolves to see who she really is with his own eyes. Captain Lazar interrupts Bernard's brooding, entering the office with a grave demeanor. He discusses the circulating article, noting that with such vitriol spreading, Agnes's situation will only deteriorate. Lazar, showing a rare streak of compassion, questions the wisdom of the collective abandonment of the Liverge daughter, acknowledging that it was her father who committed the crime, not her. He reveals that his niece actually knew Agnes and described her as a polite, kind young lady who visited the city orphanage every week for charity work, a stark contradiction to the arrogant woman described in the press. Lazar entrusts Bernard with a covert mission. He orders him to go to the orphanage immediately and, if Agnes is found there, to protect her. He instructs that she be taken directly to his own home, where his wife and children can provide a safe harbor. Bernard accepts the order, though he knows the search is futile since Agnes is already safe under his own roof. However, he sees an opportunity to uncover the truth of her past and verify Lazar's claims about her charity. Instead of going himself, Bernard dispatches his trusted deputy, the light-haired subordinate, to investigate the orphanage while he tends to affairs at the mansion. The deputy arrives at the rundown facility, immediately swarmed by energetic children who mistake him for a food delivery or a customer. He produces a pocket watch bearing the crest of the Orlean family, introducing himself with Bernard's authority to the head nun. He apologizes for the intrusion and asks for Agnes. The nun's face falls as she informs him that Miss Agnes is not there. However, she eagerly defends Agnes's character, describing her as a woman of compassion and warmth whose weekly visits brought great joy to the children. She confirms that reporters have been sniffing around, but she has told them nothing. The deputy presses, asking where Agnes might be. The nun reveals a surprising detail. Agnes originally came to the convent wishing to become a nun herself. The nun had refused her, sensing that Agnes still held deep feelings for someone and had a brighter future elsewhere. She explains that she introduced Agnes to the Mountain Goat Inn for work instead. The deputy listens, connecting the dots. The nun mentions that Agnes eventually reunited with the knight she loved, and that they left the inn holding hands. The deputy realizes with a jolt that the knight in question is his own boss, Bernard. He pieces together that Agnes is already at the Orlean mansion, safe. Back at the mansion, Bernard struggles with the household accounts. The estimate for the roof repair is staggering, 10 gold coins to replace the tiles, inner ceiling and flooring. The cost is exorbitant, requiring specialized blue paint for the tiles. On top of that, the doctor's bill and the hush money amount to 2 full months of his salary. He sighs, overwhelmed by the financial strain, but approves the temporary repairs. He learns that the doctor was a taciturn woman known to Dominic, minimizing the risk of gossip. Bernard decides to check on his patient. He stands outside the guest room, hesitating. He reminds himself that entering an unmarried woman's room is improper, but his desire to understand her overrides social convention. He knocks and enters. Agnes lies in the large bed, looking small and frail, her breathing shallow. As he approaches, Agnes stirs. In her fever-hazed delirium, she mistakes Bernard for her mother. She reaches out, clutching his hand, and whispers that she has wanted to see her for such a long time. Bernard stiffens, awkwardly correcting her, but she does not hear him. Tears stream down her face as she babbles about kindness. She cries that she cannot go with her mother yet because she hasn't repaid Orlean's kindness. Bernard stares at her, stunned. He wonders what kindness she is referring to, unable to comprehend why she feels such a debt to him when he has treated her with such coldness in the past. Meanwhile, the deputy concludes his investigation at the orphanage and heads back to report. On his way, he runs into a familiar, unwelcome face. Ernest Vanderlman, the disgraced guard from the garden incident. Ernest is lurking near the headquarters, looking for Colonel Lazar. When he finds the deputy instead, he decides to outsource his dirty work. Ernest shows the deputy a crudely drawn picture of Agnes and offers a reward of 10 gold coins for her capture. He reveals his sinister intentions without shame. He plans to hide Agnes in a cellar and make her his mistress, keeping her existence a secret from the world. He views it as protecting her from the king's wrath. He offers the deputy a promotion and political support if he cooperates. The deputy, maintaining a poker face, accepts the bag of gold coins, treating it as the price of silence. He bows, promising to inform the captain, but his internal monologue reveals his true allegiance. He takes the money and the intel, intending to report Ernest's vile scheme directly to Bernard, adding another layer of danger to the fragile sanctuary Bernard has built for Agnes. Julian, Bernard's colleague, scrutinizes the document in his hands, his face contorted with disbelief and disgust. He questions the sanity of the client, unable to fathom the audacity of a man who intends to make a daughter of the prestigious Liverge family his mistress rather than his wife. The sheer disrespect toward a noble bloodline, even a fallen one, leaves Julian baffled, as he struggles to reconcile the request with any semblance of noble conduct. Bernard sits opposite him, his expression unreadable as he processes the implications of the personal inquiry regarding Miss Agnes. Julian speculates that the client, Ernest Vanderlmen, must be underestimating their unit, assuming that because the 3rd Special Assault Battalion is small, they must be bored and willing to do dirty work. Bernard reveals that he has already decided to accept the request, a decision that shocks Julian, who worries about the repercussions of getting involved in such a scandalous private matter. Their conversation is interrupted by a heavy, authoritative presence in the corridor. Johann Blondel, the 2nd squire and a man widely considered the most prominent candidate for the next captain of the Knights, approaches them. Johann possesses an aura of command, combining strength, status, and charisma. He addresses Bernard directly, congratulating him on his recent promotion to deputy commander of the elite unit. Bernard maintains a stoic demeanor, thanking his superior humbly. Johann remarks that the Knights need young blood for the coming phase and pins great hopes on Bernard's future leadership. As Johann departs, Julian exhales a breath he seemingly held the entire time, marveling that a man of Johann's standing not only remembered Bernard's name but addressed him personally. Julian admits his envy, convinced that Bernard's rise through the ranks is inevitable and destined. Bernard returns to his mansion as evening falls, the weight of the day's politics pressing down on him. He enters his study, exhausted, and orders a bath to wash away the fatigue. Jigel, the housekeeper, informs him that Agnes wishes to speak with him immediately. Bernard agrees, though his mind is still cluttered with the day's events, trying to purge the distracting thoughts of political maneuvering. Agnes enters the room, looking pale and exhausted, having apparently just recovered from her cold. She thanks him for granting her time despite his busyness. Bernard, wanting to dispense with formalities, asks her to state her business. Agnes explains that she came simply to express her gratitude. She moves to serve him tea, insisting on doing it herself despite Jigel's offer to help. As Agnes lifts the heavy silver tray, her arms tremble under the weight. She struggles to maintain her composure, determined not to embarrass herself in front of Jigel. Bernard watches her, noting her frailty. Agnes prepares the tea, reciting Bernard's preference for milk and 3 spoons of sugar. However, as she attempts to pour the sugar, she misses the cup entirely, sending the spoon clattering and the sugar spilling onto the tray. Bernard watches her closely as she flinches, squinting intensely at the mess she made. A sudden realization strikes him like a physical blow. He observes the way she narrows her eyes, struggling to focus on objects right in front of her. He asks her, his voice dropping with dawn of understanding, if she has poor eyesight. Agnes nods silently, confirming his suspicion. The truth shatters Bernard's long-held resentment. He realizes that the cold glare she gave him 5 years ago at the ball was not disdain or arrogance, but simply the look of a girl with bad eyesight trying to see who was in front of her. He understands now that he has been living in an illusion, ruled by a momentary misunderstanding that fueled years of bitterness. He feels foolish for hiring her as a maid out of a petty desire for revenge against a slight that never existed. Agnes, misinterpreting his silence as anger or dismissal, falls to her knees and begs him to let her stay. She pleads to remain in his service, desperate to repay his kindness despite her physical limitations. She admits her eyesight is poor and she is unaccustomed to the work, but promises to give it her all. Bernard, overwhelmed by guilt and her genuine earnestness, tells her he needs time to think and dismisses her for the moment. The narrative shifts to reveal Bernard's strategic maneuvering earlier that day. He reports to Captain Lazar regarding the request from Ernest Vanderlmen. Bernard explains that Vanderlmen, a despicable scoundrel, wants the 3rd Special Assault Unit to find Agnes because he fears using other knights would alert the king to his illegal use of private funds. Vanderlmen intends to make Agnes his mistress to protect her, a fate Bernard finds cruel and unacceptable. Bernard justifies accepting the request to Lazar by explaining his counter-strategy. If he refuses, Vanderlman will simply hire someone else who might actually find and exploit her. By accepting the mission himself, Bernard can control the search and ensure Agnes remains unfound, thereby protecting her honor and safety. He frames this protection of the weak and the conquering of evil as the true duty of a knight. Back at the mansion, Bernard calls for Agnes again. He presents her with a small, woven basket containing a stray kitten he rescued from the cold. He informs her that from today on, her primary job will be to take care of this cat. He instructs her to ask Jigel for help if she needs it. Bernard then imposes one strict condition on her continued employment. She is absolutely forbidden from going out into the city. This command is his way of shielding her from the search parties and the malice of men like Vanderlman. Agnes, unaware of the specific danger but grateful for the shelter, accepts the condition immediately. She thanks him profusely, her relief palpable. Later, Bernard confides in Jigel, asking a hypothetical question about what she would do if he were suddenly stripped of his knighthood and cast out of the capital. Jigel, ever the optimist, replies cheerfully that they would simply open a small shop in the countryside. She reminds him that with 8 of them working together, they could learn different trades and live a short but fun life. Bernard smiles, finding solace in her resilience, realizing that thinking gloomily only leads to loss. He accepts that protecting Agnes is the right path, regardless of the risks to his status. Julian's voice rises in disbelief as the reality of the situation settles upon him. He stares at his colleague, stunned by the revelation that Lady Agnes Lyverge is currently under Bernard's personal protection. Bernard admits that there are complicated circumstances behind the arrangement, his expression guarded. While Julian acknowledges that Bernard's decision to shelter her wasn't morally wrong, he laments that he wasn't informed earlier. Bernard, weighed down by guilt, apologizes for his silence. Julian immediately offers his assistance, pledging to lend his aid to the cause. However, Bernard rejects the offer instantly. He insists on taking full responsibility for her safety himself. He outlines a strategy to contain the scandal. He will claim he accepted the request from Vanderlman alone to prevent the secret from leaking, thereby maintaining a facade of professional discretion while keeping Julian clear of the fallout. Julian accepts this logic, thanking Bernard for shielding him. The conversation shifts to the instigator of this mess, Lord Vanderlman. Bernard's gaze hardens as he declares he has no intention of letting the man off the hook. He explains that regardless of fault, the administrative negligence involved in the request makes him liable for punishment as well, and he refuses to let anyone else shoulder that blame. He decides to leave Vanderlman alone regarding the specific request for Agnes to avoid drawing attention to her, but reveals a deeper counter-strategy. Having investigated the man, Bernard discovered plenty of dark rumors surrounding him beyond this specific incident. He plans to bring formal charges against Vanderlman for these separate crimes, dismantling the threat without exposing Agnes. Julian looks at Bernard with newfound respect, recognizing the embodiment of their code. He recites the core tenet of their order, protecting the weak until the very end. Bernard confirms this is what a true knight should be. The two men share a moment of solidarity, with Julian promising to help when the time comes to strike against Vanderlman. The scene shifts to the tranquility of the Orlean mansion. Agnes smiles down at the small kitten nestled in a basket. She notes that its fur is the color of honey and decides to name it Meal, which means honey. Bernard agrees that it is a wonderful name. Encouraged, Agnes prepares to lift the basket to move the cat. She grips the handles, shouting a small cheer of effort. Suddenly, the sound of tearing fabric rips through the air. Agnes freezes, a small cry escaping her lips as the front of her dress bursts open. Bernard, startled by the noise, turns to see her frantically covering her chest. He realizes with a jolt that the clothes she is wearing, hand-me-downs from Jigel's daughter, are far too tight for her. The fabric strains against her figure, compressing her chest until the buttons simply gave way. Bernard flushes, averting his gaze, asking if wearing such tight clothing is a fashion trend among nobles. Agnes, mortified, admits it is fairly common, trying to salvage her dignity. Bernard spots the restrictive underwear beneath the torn fabric and questions if she is truly wearing such things. Agnes shrinks back, apologizing profusely for the trouble. Bernard, regaining his composure, declares that she cannot work in such discomfort and promises to buy her new underwear and clothes immediately. Before they can settle the matter, the door bursts open. The twin maids, Carol and Syria, rush in, shouting for their master. They have heard rumors that he intends to buy clothes for Agnes and aggressively petition for him to buy them outfits with puff sleeves as well. They shove a catalog into his face, bubbling with excitement about the cute, poofy designs. Bernard looks bewildered, asking what a puff sleeve even is. The twins then pivot to Agnes, scrutinizing her appearance. They decide that to hide her identity, they should style her hair in simple twin braids to make her look plainer. However, as they manipulate her hair, they hit a wall. Even with the simple hairstyle, Agnes's natural beauty and refinement shine through, making her look unnaturally elegant for a servant. The twins give up, declaring the disguise impossible. Bernard takes charge of the wardrobe situation. He dismisses the twins' frivolous suggestions and consults with Jigel to find a suitable uniform. He points to a design in the catalog, a plain, dull dress devoid of frills or puff sleeves. He declares that as long as she wears something this unremarkably humble, she will appear only as an ordinary maid. He orders that specific model, ignoring any potential objections. Later, Agnes sits in the study, now dressed in the modest uniform Bernard selected. She holds a basket on her lap, looking the part of a perfect, humble servant. She tells Bernard that she wishes to report on the day's events. Bernard, sitting opposite her, invites her to speak. Agnes begins talking about the cat, Meal. As she speaks, Bernard notices something peculiar. Agnes is squinting, her face scrunching up as she tries to focus on him. She leans forward, narrowing her eyes in a way that looks almost like a glare. Bernard interrupts her, asking bluntly why her eyesight is weak. Agnes hesitates, then confesses. She explains that she used to read books in secret, hidden away in dark rooms to avoid the eyes of her father and the servants. This strain caused her vision to deteriorate. Bernard asks why she felt compelled to do that. Agnes's expression turns melancholic as she recounts her past. When she was 12, her mother passed away. Following the tragedy, her father became obsessed with her education, forcing lesson after lesson upon her. Flashbacks reveal a young Agnes drowning in study materials. Her father demands perfection, insisting she complete a first-class education in the 3 years remaining before her debut. He threatens to punish her tutors if her grades drop, placing the burden of others' livelihoods on her shoulders. He tells her she was born solely to marry into the royal family, stripping her of any other identity. Agnes explains that the pressure caused her severe insomnia. One day, she was advised that reading might make her drowsy, so she borrowed a book. Instead of sleep, she found escape. The world within the story, the princess and the fairy, was full of freedom and adventure, casting a spell over her. She became addicted to the reprieve, reading in the dark even on the night before her debut. Bernard listens, captivated. He asks what exactly she was reading that night. Agnes blushes, revealing the title, The Adventure of the Night Bear. Bernard freezes. Agnes continues, explaining that when she first met him, her attendant had gossiped that he was the 5th son of a provincial noble and was nicknamed Bear Man. She recalls hearing that his name meant a man as strong as a bear. She admits that The Adventure of the Night Bear is her absolute favorite story. When she saw him at the ball 5 years ago, she wasn't glaring at him with disdain. She was squinting to see him clearly because she was excited to meet the real-life Night Bear she had heard so much about. She had wanted to talk to him, but he disappeared too quickly. The revelation hits Bernard like a physical blow. He realizes he completely misjudged her. For 5 years, he believed she looked down on him, fueling a resentment that led him to hire her as a maid out of spite. He realizes he has been living in an illusion born of his own insecurity. Agnes apologizes for not wearing glasses, explaining that she feared her father's anger if he discovered her weakened eyesight. She blames herself for the trouble, believing that if she had just been honest, none of this would have happened. She shrinks back, ashamed of her glare, unaware that Bernard is currently battling a tidal wave of guilt. Bernard clears his throat, his voice gentle. He thanks her for the truth. He reassures her that she does not need to worry anymore. He declares that he will not dismiss her and that as long as she is in his mansion, she is safe. Agnes beams, bowing deeply in gratitude. The scene shifts to a grand, imposing estate elsewhere in the kingdom. An elegant older woman stands by a window, looking out at the gloomy weather. She muses that things have felt dull lately and wonders if there is something fun she could do. A thought strikes her. She remembers that her 5th son is still unmarried. A mischievous smile spreads across her face as she decides it is the perfect opportunity to pay a visit to her dear, adorable little bear. The looming arrival of Bernard's mother threatens to upend the fragile peace he has just established. The narrative summarizes Bernard's internal monologue regarding his decision. A few days ago, he resolved to officially take Agnes under his protection, fully aware of the immense risks. He acknowledges his convictions as a knight, refusing to compromise on helping the vulnerable, even if she is from a fallen family. He admits it's a gamble, wishing for a peaceful outcome but preparing for the worst. In the early morning light, Bernard encounters Dominic, the gardener, in the courtyard. They exchange pleasantries, noting the early hour. Bernard takes a moment to center himself, preparing for the day ahead. He then visits the kitchen, where he finds Agnes. She is wearing the maid uniform he provided, but something is wrong. The buttons on the bodice have popped off, leaving her flustered and embarrassed. Bernard, confused, asks what happened. Agnes explains that when she raised her arm, the buttons simply flew away. Bernard is baffled, unable to understand why the uniform failed so spectacularly. Agnes, blushing furiously, suggests that perhaps she has gotten a little fuller in figure. Bernard is skeptical, stating she looks the same to him. The other maids, Syria and Carol, chime in, confirming the incident and adding that Jigel witnessed it too. They mention that Jigel has already gone out to buy a replacement. The conversation takes a turn when Agnes reveals she is currently binding her body with compression clothing. Bernard is horrified, asking if that means she is wearing a corset with metal stays. Agnes confirms it, explaining it's a common undergarment to shape the body. Bernard, concerned for her comfort and health, asks if it hurts and how she can move normally. Agnes, misinterpreting his concern as judgment on her appearance, asks anxiously if he finds her attractive. Bernard, caught off guard, reassures her that she is already beautiful enough without such restrictive clothing. Agnes is relieved but admits she has always been insecure about her figure because other noble ladies were much slimmer. She reveals she has been worrying about this since before her debut. Bernard, exasperated by the societal pressures she has faced, tells her she is already slim enough. He orders her to stop wearing the corset, declaring she cannot work in such discomfort. He promises to buy her new, properly fitting underwear. Agnes is touched by his care but tries to decline, not wanting to be a burden. Bernard insists, grabbing her hand to emphasize his point. He then awkwardly asks her to help in the kitchen to change the subject. Later, Bernard receives a shock. Jigel informs him that she received a letter from his mother, the madam. The letter states that his mother is worried because he has shown no interest in marriage and is coming to the capital herself to find him a wife. She declares that the bride doesn't need to be noble, just a good woman who loves her son. Bernard panics, shouting, "Don't come here," at the letter. He argues that he has no intention of marrying and that no noble lady would want to live in his rundown mansion anyway. Jigel, unsympathetic, reminds him that his mother is a woman of action who has successfully married off all his brothers through her direct intervention. She warns him that he cannot stop her. Desperate, Bernard begs Jigel for help. Jigel refuses to oppose the madam directly but offers a solution. Bernard must pretend to already have a fiancé. She suggests Agnes for the role. Bernard is stunned, asking if such a deception is really possible. Jigel assures him it is simple. He just needs to tell everyone he is engaged, and the marriage talk will stop. She advises him to ask Agnes himself, in his own words. Bernard considers the plan. He realizes he has no other options and that borrowing Agnes's help is the only way to avoid an arranged marriage. He resolves to ask her. He finds Agnes in the dining hall and nervously broaches the subject. He stammers through his request, accidentally shouting, "Be my fiancé," instead of explaining the fake engagement first. Agnes is shocked. Bernard quickly corrects himself, explaining he needs her to pretend to be his fiancée for a while due to a difficult situation. Agnes, relieved and eager to repay his kindness, accepts immediately. She admits she is not good at acting but promises to do her best. She tells him there is no need to thank her, as he has already done so much for her. She smiles, her expression genuine and warm, devoid of the arrogance he once projected onto her. Bernard looks at her, his heart softening. He admits to himself that he can't erase his past prejudice but acknowledges that she has always been kind and gentle. He notices her hair has grown and suggests she tidy up her appearance before his mother arrives the next day. The maids, Carol and Syria, jump in with suggestions for Agnes's fiancé look. They propose flashy hairstyles and cute outfits, but Jigel vetoes them, opting for a simple, elegant style instead. Bernard entrusts Agnes to their care, telling her he will be a true knight and do everything to help her play the role. The next day, the preparations are complete. The twins, Carol and Syria, are excited, but Gigel has dressed Agnes in a modest, elegant dress that fits perfectly, replacing the ill-fitting uniform. Bernard enters the room, dressed in his finest suit. He sees Agnes and freezes. She looks stunning, every bit the noble lady she was born to be. The mood is tense as they hear a carriage arrive. The door swings open, and the servants announce the arrival of the madam. Bernard and Agnes stand together, arm in arm, bracing themselves for the whirlwind that is about to enter their lives. Agnes trembles slightly, but Bernard holds her steady, ready to face his formidable mother with his fake fiancée by his side. Tension hangs heavy in the air as the carriage arrives at the Orleans estate, the servants lining up with disciplined precision to welcome the matriarch. Bernard stands stiffly, his posture betraying a deep-seated nervousness as his mother steps out. She immediately notes his rigid demeanor, remarking on how tense he seems despite her claims that she is simply a mother visiting her son. Her sharp gaze and commanding presence, however, suggest a scrutiny that pierces through his composed facade, leaving him sweating and searching for words. She greets Agnes with a polite but penetrating smile, declaring it a pleasure to meet her, while Bernard worries internally about the calculations running through her mind. The scene shifts to the parlor, where the mother fans herself with an elegant yet intimidating rhythm. She fixes her eyes on her son and declares, somewhat unexpectedly, that she is truly proud of him. Bernard blinks in confusion, unsure how to process the praise. She elaborates, mentioning the dessert she prepared yesterday with Mrs. Gigel, commending the skill involved in cutting the molds. She notes that Bernard seems speechless from shock, a masterful misinterpretation of his sheer panic. The conversation takes a somber turn as she addresses the scandal surrounding Agnes's family. She speaks with a firm authority, stating she read about the misfortune in the newspaper and sympathizes with the suffering Agnes has endured. Looking directly at the young woman, she asserts that the father's transgressions have nothing to do with the daughter, absolving Agnes of any wrongdoing with a decisive finality. Suddenly, the mother pivots to the topic Bernard feared most, the origin story of their relationship. Bernard freezes, his mind racing as he recalls the script he wrote to prevent a forced, hasty marriage. He knows they must convince her their engagement is real, but he feels unprepared for such immediate interrogation. Before he can stammer out his prepared backstory, Agnes interjects with a shocking declaration: they fell in love at first sight. The mother gasps, stunned to learn this romance began 5 years ago. Bernard frantically signals for a pause, realizing Agnes has completely deviated from the script. Agnes presses on with her fabrication, recounting a royal palace ball during the year of her social debut. Bernard watches helplessly as she weaves a tale about her obsession with night stories, specifically those involving knights accompanied by bears. She claims she couldn't believe her luck when she met a knight whose name meant bear, confessing she fell for him the moment she heard it. Bernard stares at her, bewildered by the absurdity of the first impression she invented. He whispers to her, questioning why she accepted the role of his fiancée and if she understands the implications. Agnes smiles brightly, assuring him she is not forcing herself and was happy to accept because she owes him a great debt of gratitude. Bernard's expression falls slightly, disappointed that her motivation stems from gratitude rather than the romantic notion she just spun. Agnes continues her story, drifting into a genuine flashback of that night 5 years ago. She recalls being ignored by the prince during her debut, a crushing disappointment for a young girl. In her distress, she lost her escort and wandered alone, eventually needing rescue. It was Bernard, the bear knight, who saved her. The memory vividly replays him scooping her up in his arms and urging her to run away with him to escape the chaos. She explains to the mother that he vanished before she could properly thank him, creating a lingering regret that defined the favor she spoke of. She describes how she later went to the knight's headquarters to find him, but her family's fall into poverty and her near decision to become a nun interrupted her pursuit. Turning back to the present, Agnes looks at Bernard with sincere eyes, telling him that no matter what she says, she can never thank him enough. The mother softens, visibly touched by the story. She admits she worried about how Bernard, having grown up surrounded by brothers and soldiers, would handle himself around women. She beams, concluding that he is indeed a kind-hearted boy, and thanks Agnes for accepting the engagement. Bernard exhales, realizing the ruse has succeeded perfectly. His mother bought the story, which means the barrage of marriage proposals from other families will finally cease. He credits Agnes's smooth improvisation for saving the day. The mother then offers her analysis of the situation, praising Bernard for his choice. She acknowledges that taking in the daughter of a disgraced family without consultation is unorthodox and risky. However, she frames it as a noble sacrifice, admiring his willingness to put himself on the line to protect someone else, a trait she respects deeply. She dismisses the potential political fallout, noting their territory is far enough from the capital to remain unaffected. Bernard admits to himself he hadn't even considered the family's reputation, only wanting to protect Agnes until things settled. The mother, energized by this romantic narrative, suddenly declares they should hold the wedding in their territory. Bernard panics again, trying to pump the brakes by reminding her they are only engaged and marriage is a distant prospect. His mother scolds his careless tone, waving her fan dismissively. She insists that talking is a waste of precious time and announces she is taking Mrs. Gigel shopping immediately. She proclaims that a wedding requires immense preparation, ignoring Bernard's protests about Agnes's family situation. As she sweeps out of the room calling him her little bear, Bernard collapses onto the sofa, physically pained by the whirlwind of events. Later, Bernard attempts to visit Agnes in her room, but his path is blocked by the twin maids. They stand resolute, arms crossed, declaring that the lady of the house and their mother have gone to the city, leaving strict orders to bar entry. They cite the impropriety of an unmarried man and woman being alone in a closed room. Bernard pleads urgency, but the twins remind him that they now serve Lady Agnes and must protect her honor. Desperate, Bernard attempts to bribe them with a trip to the famous White Rabbit Cafe in the capital. The twins resolve waivers as they blush at the prospect of sweets, but they ultimately steel themselves, remembering their mother's word is absolute. After a standoff, they reach a compromise. He may enter only if they both sit in the room with them. Inside the room, Bernard sits across from Agnes under the watchful eyes of the twins. He explains the escalating situation, informing Agnes that his mother intends to make the wedding dress herself. He apologizes for the intensity of the preparations, noting that in noble families, these engagements can drag on for years. He tries to reassure her, explaining that the situation has spiraled beyond the original plan of a temporary engagement. He promises that if things reach a critical point, he will take full responsibility. A massive misunderstanding ensues. Bernard's internal monologue reveals that by responsibility, he means securing Agnes a quiet life in a remote, hard-to-find rural village until she is safe. Agnes, however, interprets his words through the lens of social convention, believing responsibility means he intends to marry her for real. She blushes furiously, stammering that she cannot possibly ask him to go that far. Oblivious to her interpretation, Bernard asks a probing question. Is there someone else she is thinking about? He clarifies he means someone she actually loves. Agnes stares blankly and replies simply that there is no one. Bernard gazes at her, a mix of confusion and intrigue on his face, and mutters that she is a truly strange girl. The atmosphere in the room vibrates with a mix of genuine excitement and concealed anxiety as Agnes and Lady Ashen pore over the latest bridal catalogs. Agnes, internalizing the weight of her deception, reflects that she was only supposed to pretend to be a fiancée, yet she finds herself swept up in the current of genuine wedding preparations. She remarks to the older woman that the designs are drastically different from the fashion of her own time, finding the novelty actually quite exciting. Lady Ashen, beaming with the thrill of the hunt, expresses her delight at having gone to the city with Gigel to purchase these catalogs, noting that Agnes seems at a loss amidst the flurry of options. The matriarch reassures Agnes that she will look wonderful in any garment, which ironically makes the decision even harder. Lady Ashen asks for Agnes's opinion on a specific design, noting that wedding dresses should lift the bride's spirits. She points out a beautiful gown, then immediately pivots to another that might better accentuate the beauty of Agnes's hair. As Agnes struggles to keep pace with the rapidly moving situation, she feels that events are spiraling out of her control far too quickly. Lady Ashen, observing the styles, feels a sudden wave of nostalgia, recalling that her own mother's wedding dress shared a similar style. She notes that back in her era, puff sleeves were all the rage, a design element seemingly absent from the modern catalogs. The older woman confesses that despite the trouble of planning, she spent many nights wondering which dress would make her look the most beautiful, remembering that she was about Agnes's age when she sought her own mother's advice. The happiness she felt back then was potent enough to make her forget everything else. Turning to Agnes with a solemn warmth, Lady Ashen expresses her hope that this marriage will bring Agnes happiness as well. She imparts a nugget of maternal wisdom, admitting that while married life is not always filled with joy, the difficulty of living alone in her era drove her to desire a life with someone she could trust. She then inquires if Agnes has a design or idea of her own, asking which dress she prefers. Agnes hesitates before revealing a painful truth. Everything in her family's house was confiscated, but her mother's wedding dress remains. She confesses that she had always admired how her mother looked in it and had dreamed of wearing that very same dress when she got married. Lady Ashen apologizes for her insensitivity, not realizing the situation, but Agnes assures her it is fine. Seizing upon this revelation, Lady Ashen suggests that if they repair the vintage dress, it could work perfectly. Agnes worries if it would be acceptable for the dress to not align with the latest fashion, but also notes that the design likely resembles Lady Ashen's mother's dress. The matriarch enthusiastically agrees, proposing they use it as a reference for creating a new dress, which would strategically extend the preparation period for the ceremony, a delay that secretly benefits Agnes's cover story. Agnes asks if she can see the dress next time, to which Ashen agrees, calling it a lovely choice. Suddenly, the door bursts open, and Bernard storms in, his composure fracturing under the pressure of the escalating charade. He demands to know what is going on, shocked that his mother has taken such a liking to Agnes that she is preparing for an actual wedding. He mutters in a low voice to Agnes that the plan was merely to introduce a fiancé so his mother would leave peacefully, not to orchestrate a full nuptial event. Agnes, sharing his bewilderment, whispers back that she thought the same. Lady Ashen, observing their whispered panic, casually suggests they just get married for real, arguing that they make a lovely couple. She states that she understands their hesitation but believes it would be fine if they proceeded. Bernard attempts to regain control, arguing that she cannot simply decide their future on her own, as it might embarrass Agnes. Lady Ashen counters with a sharp observation of their dynamic, noting that opposite personalities suit each other best, citing her own marriage as an example. She characterizes Bernard as impulsive and Agnes as calm and gentle, suggesting they balance one another. Bernard dryly retorts that she sounds more skilled in scheming than wisdom. Unfazed, Lady Ashen offers a final ultimatum: whichever path they choose is fine, and she would even help them plan an escape from the situation if they truly didn't want it, emphasizing that mutual feelings are the most important factor. Later, the scene shifts to the library where Bernard and his mother discuss the state of the estate. Bernard reveals the house is 100 years old and hasn't been painted since its construction due to a lack of funds. Lady Ashen sips her tea, noting the exterior walls look yellowish. Bernard, pragmatic, states there are things more important than walls. The conversation inevitably turns to finances, specifically the wedding money. Lady Ashen reminds him that ceremonies require significant expenses. She begins to list the costs: rental of the reception hall, preparations for guests, formal outfits for the bride and groom, the marriage certificate fee, and the honeymoon trip. Bernard clutches his head in agony, the reality of the financial burden crashing down on him as he realizes the sheer magnitude of what marriage means. Bernard retreats to a table with Agnes, his posture defeated. He promises to figure something out somehow. He remarks that his mother is far too excited about the wedding, a fact he noticed quite clearly. In a moment of vulnerability, he thanks Agnes, acknowledging that she really helped him a lot today. Agnes graciously replies that it didn't bother her in the slightest and there is no need to apologize, even though Bernard feels guilty for dragging her into his personal troubles. Agnes counters his apology with gratitude, stating that her conversation with Lady Ashen reminded her of her own mother and that she gained lovely memories thanks to both of them. The conversation turns to Agnes's integration into the household. Bernard notes that Jigel, the twins, and even Eric have been supporting her, and she has been smiling a lot more lately, owing her progress to them. Agnes internally resolves to pull herself together and act more mature. Bernard then notices something and changes the subject, mentioning there was something he wanted to talk to her about. Agnes reveals a handkerchief she was embroidering while talking to Lady Ashen, explaining the pattern is called the Merlan tree, a symbol of good fortune said to bring happiness. Bernard compliments her skill. However, the tender moment is interrupted when Agnes spots a red mark on the back of Bernard's neck. She asks if he was bitten by an insect while helping Dominic with work in the morning. Bernard dismisses it, saying it will heal on its own. Agnes insists on bringing ointment, warning that it could be troublesome if it gets worse. Bernard stubbornly refuses, claiming he doesn't need it. Agnes reveals she already has the ointment in hand, outmaneuvering him. Bernard tries to take it to apply it himself, but realizing it's a waste to argue, he resigns himself to his defeat. He sits quietly, unable to argue back, as Agnes prepares to apply the medicine. Agnes gently applies the ointment to his neck, apologizing that the spot is hard to reach alone. Bernard is visibly uncomfortable, groaning and urging her to hurry up. He flinches, his face flushing, and insists he will handle it himself next time. Agnes advises him to apply it 3 times a day for quick healing. Once she finishes, she cheerfully announces it is done. Later, in the kitchen, Agnes speaks with the household staff. She mentions that Bernard said it would be the last time she applies the medicine. One of the maids guesses that the Lord wasn't very cooperative, noting Agnes looks down. The maid reveals a shocking truth. The Lord hates medicine with a passion. Agnes is stunned to learn that Bernard actually used the ointment, as he typically refuses all medical treatment. The staff explains that even as an adult, Bernard completely dislikes doctors, refusing liquid medicine, ointments, and eye drops alike. They speculate he might have refused Agnes only to hide his weakness. The staff laments that Bernard often gets cuts and scratches during training or missions and wish he would take better care of himself. They praise Dominic, who makes special homemade ointments and bandages for Bernard. The ointment Agnes used has a lovely lavender scent and is considered more effective than pharmacy products. A maid suggests that if they tell Bernard the ointment was made by Agnes, he might agree to use it. Agnes lights up at the idea, and they decide to make one together next time, settling the plan with the hope that it will make him happy. The following morning, the atmosphere at the dining table is lighter but laced with tension. Lady Ashen comments on Bernard's attire, noticing he is not wearing his knight's uniform. Agnes mentions that the uniform is elegant and dignified, but Bernard explains he usually changes into it at headquarters. Lady Ashen expresses disappointment, having wanted to see him in it before she returned to the province. She then drops a bombshell question, asking Agnes if she really loves Bernard. The question hangs in the air. Lady Ashen turns to her son, stating she doesn't doubt what he said yesterday, but she needs to know if he really intends to marry Agnes. Bernard stammers, caught off guard. Lady Ashen presses Agnes again. A maid intervenes, trying to defuse the situation by claiming the Lord is just very shy about these things. Lady Ashen admits she sensed a lack of seriousness from him. Agnes, feeling the pressure and the weight of the moment, decides to speak. She declares that she holds deep feelings of admiration for Lord Bernard. This admission acts as a critical blow. Bernard covers his face with his hand, blushing furiously, completely overwhelmed by her words. Lady Ashen, satisfied by this display of genuine emotion, smiles and tells Agnes to take good care of him from now on. Agnes agrees. With the interrogation over, Bernard believes the threat of his mother has finally passed. He stands outside, feeling a moment of relief. However, his peace is shattered instantly. A man named Ernest approaches him, greeting him with a chilling familiarity. Ernest states he is a kind man and will be direct. Bernard, confused and wary, asks what he is talking about. Ernest, with a knowing look, asserts that Bernard already knows why he is there. He delivers the final, devastating line. He has found Agnes Loveridge. Ernest, a man dripping with unearned confidence, extends a hand toward Bernard, offering a sordid deal. He promises 10 gold coins and a guaranteed promotion if Bernard brings in Agnes Loveridge, his voice laced with the assumption that every man has a price. He smirks, instructing Bernard not to look so grim, framing the betrayal of a noblewoman as a simple transaction. Bernard stands silently, his bangs shadowing his eyes, while Ernest interprets his silence as hesitation. Internally, however, Bernard stares at the man, categorizing him as a pitiful fool while feigning ignorance to stroke the other man's ego. Ernest presses on, revealing an extra layer to the mission. He demands custody of Agnes, effectively asking Bernard to deliver her into his personal protection. Bernard suppresses a sigh of disgust, his mind racing for a way to extricate himself from this conversation without blowing his cover. Ernest, oblivious to the contempt facing him, hands over an invitation to a location known as the Cypress Inn, claiming his excellent investigative skills have located the fugitive there. He scoffs at the idea of a noblewoman hiding in a brothel, suggesting she thought she had cleverly escaped notice, but his reports indicate she has been there for several days. Bernard accepts the information with a feigned expression of shock, while privately noting that it is fortunate his adversary is an idiot. Later, inside a carriage, Bernard debriefs his subordinate, Orlean. He explains that Ernest ordered him to seize custody of Agnes because he secretly desires to make her his mistress. Bernard deduces that Ernest's obsession stems from a twisted desire to dominate the woman who previously refused to yield to him. Orlean listens, stunned by the stupidity of the scheme, but Bernard pivots to the tactical advantage this provides. The unit had already received intelligence about the Cypress in days prior. The luxury brothel housing the fake Agnes functions as a high-end drug trafficking hub, selling narcotics at exorbitant prices to wealthy patrons. The establishment markets itself by offering women of exceptional beauty and intelligence, naturally attracting a criminal element alongside the aristocracy. Bernard connects the sudden appearance of the imposter Agnes with the start of the drug trade in that area, theorizing a strong link between the two events. The 3rd Assault Unit plans to use this opportunity to raid the establishment and punish the underworld operators. The strategy is simple: contact the imposter, secure on-site evidence of the crimes, and trigger an arrest. Thanks to the Intelligence Bureau, they already possess a legitimate invitation card, making infiltration straightforward. Bernard instructs Orlean to secure proof of the drug deal and give the signal, at which point the unit will storm the building. To ensure the mission's success, Bernard dons a disguise consisting of a wig and a fake mustache. He preens slightly, asking if he looks handsome, while noting he resembles his father. Orlean laughs, commenting that he looks like a completely different person. Bernard reminds him not to forget the gifts prepared for the target before they exit the carriage. They approach the Cypress Inn, where a doorman apologizes for the trouble and asks for their invitation. Bernard notes internally that despite the location's reputation for secret deals, entry is suspiciously easy. They are ushered inside to meet the guest. In a lavish private room, Bernard finally lays eyes on the woman claiming to be Agnes Loverge. She bears a striking resemblance to the real Agnes, though her features are obscured by heavy makeup intended to mimic the noblewoman's appearance. She introduces herself as Agnes Loverge with practiced grace. Bernard plays the role of a wealthy patron, suggesting they start with tea. He offers her a box of sweets, identifying them as scones from the White Rabbit Cafe, a trendy spot in the capital. He watches her reaction closely. The woman claims her younger sister wanted to try them once, feigning familiarity. Bernard observes that while she lacks specific knowledge, her gestures and speech patterns are undeniably those of a noble lady, behaviors that are not easily learned by a commoner. Bernard pushes the conversation toward her past, asking about her family. The woman falters, inventing a story about older brothers and a simple countryside upbringing, a direct contradiction to the real Agnes's life. Seeing an opening, Bernard pours her a glass of fine wine he brought for the occasion. The woman drinks, noting it has been a long time since she tasted such luxury. As the alcohol takes hold, her facade cracks. She speaks with a detached melancholy about the men who visit her, lavishing money and jewelry upon her until their funds run dry, at which point she simply bids them farewell. She cynically observes that these men aren't captivated by her, but rather drunk on their own vanity. Suddenly, the gift takes effect. The wine or scones contained a truth serum. The woman's eyes glaze over, and the truth spills out. She confesses she is not Agnes. She reveals she was kidnapped as a child solely because her face resembled the noblewoman's. Her captors threw her into the brothel, where the owner subjected her to strict noble-style training to create a perfect counterfeit. Tears stream down her face as she explains that upon reaching adulthood, she was forced to sell drugs to customers, watching them collapse one by one. She admits she couldn't run because her family would be harmed. Bernard listens intently as she breaks down, declaring she can no longer stand living in deceit. She opens a container, revealing the white powder she was ordered to sell. Through her sobs, she expresses a desperate wish to return to her family and feed her little sisters the delicious pastries she just ate. Bernard comforts her, acknowledging her bravery in confessing and telling her she did well. Orlean, witnessing the confession and the evidence, signals the unit. He tells the woman to leave the rest to them. Outside, the 3rd Assault Unit mobilizes, storming the Cypress Inn. Knights crash through windows and doors, shouting for everyone to surrender. The owner of the brothel, realizing the raid is underway, confronts Bernard. He sneers, realizing Bernard is not the customer he hoped for. Bernard confirms he is dealing with the owner and draws the line of engagement. The owner orders his men to eliminate the intruder, mocking Bernard as one unarmed man. Bernard, however, calmly retorts that he is quite strong. The skirmish is swift. The knights secure the building, finding drug deals taking place throughout the premises. The owner is apprehended, bound, and protesting his innocence regarding the mastermind behind the fake Agnes plot. He screams that he received sudden orders from a masked agent and knows nothing else. Bernard accepts that they have collected abundant evidence and secured the safety of the victims, even if the mastermind remains elusive for now. He orders the unit to withdraw. Later that night, Bernard returns to the Orlean estate, physically and mentally drained. He assumes the servants are asleep due to the late hour. However, as he enters, a warm voice welcomes him back. The real Agnes stands there, greeting him with a gentle acknowledgement of his long day, providing a stark, comforting contrast to the deception and vice he just dismantled. Several days have passed since the arrest of the impostor, and the atmosphere within the Orleans estate has shifted from high tension to a calculated quiet. In Bernard's study, he and his vice-captain, Orleans, review the aftermath of the incident involving the fake Agnes. The event sent shockwaves through upper-class society, but Bernard notes with relief that the current rumors are far lighter than the malicious scandals of the past. Weekly magazines, once filled with vitriol, now publish reports clearing Lady Agnes's name. The fake Agnes publicly confessed that the noisy affairs and extortion of expensive gifts were entirely her own doing, effectively absolving the real Agnes of the slander that had plagued her since House Laverge's downfall. The narrative in the town has flipped completely. The magazines now describe the real Agnes as a refined, kind-hearted, and well-mannered woman, a reputation bolstered by published testimony from a nun at the orphanage. Orleans observes that the truth has finally been revealed, suggesting that those who once targeted her would no longer dare to approach. However, Bernard remains grim. He points out that this vindication is a double-edged sword. The movements to search for the missing real Agnes have become significantly more active. Bernard confesses to Orleans that he hasn't told Agnes the full extent of the danger yet, as she has been preoccupied with her own family matters. He recalls his previous advice for her to move to a village where one of his relatives lives. He argues that even though his estate is on the outskirts, it is still too close to the capital, keeping the risk of discovery high. Orleans agrees with the assessment, urging Bernard to tell her soon, as living near the capital is becoming increasingly dangerous. Bernard dismisses Orleans for the day, telling him to go home and rest, thanking him for his hard work in settling the chaos of the past few days. Seeking a moment of respite, Bernard takes a stroll through the city streets during the day, a luxury he hasn't afforded himself in a long time. His thoughts drift to Agnes. He realizes he still hasn't properly thanked her for her help with his mother. He remembers that the sweets the fake Agnes used were submitted as evidence, identifying the shop as the White Rabbit Cafe. Finding himself in front of the establishment, he awkwardly joins the queue to place a takeout order, rationalizing to himself that he should buy gifts since he might not get another chance to visit. Upon his return to the estate, Agnes greets him at the door, noting he returned early. Bernard, looking flushed and averting his gaze, thrusts a box toward her. He gruffly states that this is for what she did before. When Agnes questions if he is giving it to her, Bernard panics, shouting that she shouldn't misunderstand. He claims he didn't go out of his way to buy it, but simply found it on sale and bought a little more than he needed. Agnes stares at him, recognizing this as a downright blatant lie, but accepts the box with a polite smile and thanks him. As he walks away, Bernard chastises himself for the clumsy excuse, feeling useless. Suddenly, his vision blurs. He realizes his throat hurts and his head feels fuzzy, signs of fatigue finally catching up to him. Having never fallen ill before, he is unprepared for the sensation and collapses. Bernard wakes sometime later in his bed, disoriented. He feels something cold on his forehead and realizes his body feels lighter than before. Agnes is by his side, explaining she came to check on his room because he didn't seem well and found him asleep, as if he had collapsed from exhaustion. She asks if he is thirsty, and upon his confirmation, she prepares a special drink, honey with lemon. She explains with a smile that her mother always made it for her whenever she caught a cold. Bernard sips the drink, finding it delicious. The doctor has assured him he will recover by tomorrow, but Agnes reminds him to take his medicine. In the quiet of the room, Bernard's thoughts turn dark. He worries that if he falls ill like this again, he might fail to protect her. He decides to broach the subject of her relocation. He asks if she knows of the Queen's Wine, a famous product from a village in the southwest. Bernard describes the village as a quiet, beautiful place surrounded by vineyards, far removed from the dangers of the capital. He suggests it would be an ideal place for her to live out of sight. Agnes freezes, realizing the implication of his words. Bernard presses on, explaining that one of his superiors, a relative, is the governor of that region, and both he and the villagers would surely welcome her. He insists that life there would be easier than here. Agnes is shaken, her eyes wide with distress. Bernard advises her to think carefully before making her decision and suggests she consult Jigel about the matter. Agnes leaves the room, trembling. In the hallway, Jigel finds Agnes looking completely pale and asks what is wrong. Seeing her state, the head maid sits her down and offers her a remedy, homemade tea paired with a bar of chocolate from the Foz company. Jigel explains she usually keeps the chocolate for hot chocolate but eats it straight when she feels down or tired to gain energy. Agnes reveals Bernard's suggestion that she move and live elsewhere. Jigel listens somberly, agreeing that the village in the southwest is known to be a comfortable place. She validates Bernard's logic. Agnes has drawn too much attention, and if her identity were exposed, it would be a disaster. Leaving the capital to live quietly is objectively the best option. Agnes clutches her apron, tears welling in her eyes. She acknowledges that Bernard made the suggestion out of genuine concern because he is kind. However, she breaks down, admitting that the thought of parting from Bernard, Jigel, and Meal saddens her deeply. She feels guilty that she hasn't yet repaid them for their kindness, yet she knows moving is the logical choice. She asks Jigel what she should do. Jigel places a comforting hand on Agnes's head. She reassures Agnes that Bernard had already made up his mind to protect her when he brought her there, so she shouldn't worry about troubling him. Jigel states clearly that the decision belongs to Agnes. She offers a profound piece of advice. Life is only lived once. Think about what you truly want. Live it the way you love. These words strike a chord deep within Agnes. It is the first time in her life she has heard such sentiment. She wipes her tears, her expression shifting from despair to determination. She realizes what she wants, to live here, to stay by Lord Bernard's side. Jigel smiles warmly at this resolve and encourages her to keep fighting together. Bolstered by this support, Agnes marches back to Bernard's room, opens the door, and declares that there is something she wishes to speak with him about. The morning sun filters through the curtains as Bernard visits Agnes's room, observing that she seems to have made her decision regarding her future. He notes that a full night has passed since he suggested she move to the countryside for her safety. Agnes sits up in bed, looking refreshed, and confirms that after sleeping for a whole day, she has completely recovered. Bernard politely asks if she is feeling better, to which she affirms she is, prompting him to inquire if she has reached a conclusion about moving in. Agnes hesitates for a moment, her hands clenching the bedsheets, before she declares her wish to stay. Agnes bows her head deeply, formally requesting that he allow her to continue working there as a maid. She acknowledges the risk, stating she knows that if her identity as the daughter of a criminal is discovered, it will negatively affect his reputation. Bernard, surprised by her resolve, asks for her reason. Agnes lifts her head, her expression earnest, and answers simply that living here suits her perfectly. Bernard, taken aback, asks, what? As he processes her refusal to leave. He presses her, asking if she realizes that the public's view of her in the capital has changed, implying the danger has shifted forms. Agnes insists she wants to know the truth. Bernard warns her that it is a disgusting story and suggests it might be better if she doesn't hear it, but she remains firm, pleading for him to tell her. Bernard recounts the events that transpired, explaining that while the fake Agnes has been arrested and her bad reputation cleared, a new problem has arisen. He reveals that everyone has started searching for the real Agnes, and that Ernest is still hunting for any trace of her. Agnes is visibly shaken, murmuring, "This can't be," as she processes the news. Bernard tells her to raise her head and apologizes for causing her trouble. He emphasizes the strategic reality. His estate is in the outskirts, but it is still too close to the capital, meaning they must avoid her being found at any cost. Resigning himself to her decision to stay, Bernard switches to tactical planning. He declares they must take precautions and decides the first step is to change her hairstyle. He reasons that there aren't many maids who wear their hair in such neat braids, implying her current style is too distinctive. Agnes agrees, asking what kind of hairstyle he would prefer. Bernard recalls the hairstyles of other servants, specifically mentioning twin braids, like Carol wears, thinking it a safe, common option. The visual result, however, backfires on Bernard's intentions. Agnes appears with her hair done in twin braids, looking undeniably youthful and innocent. Bernard blushes furiously, covering his mouth and groaning, "Ugh," physically recoiling from the sight. He averts his gaze, sweating, and tells her it doesn't look good. He sternly instructs her never to let her hair down in front of men, a command born from his own flustered reaction rather than actual impropriety. Agnes, misunderstanding his reaction as disapproval of her appearance, squeaks in terror and apologizes profusely. Bernard mentally notes that while the hairstyle will work, he needs to ensure she looks convincing after the full disguise is applied. Later, inside his office, Bernard discusses the situation with Orline. Orline confirms that Lady Agnes decided not to move, noting that she seems to find it hard to part with the place she is used to. Bernard expresses his gratitude to Orline but admits it will be difficult from here on, promising to help however he can. Orline, sensing the underlying tension, asks a pointed question: does Bernard intend to marry Lady Agnes? Bernard stares at him in silence before Orline suggests that maybe it would be better if he just married her. Orline pragmatically points out that she is a woman of marriageable age and might wish to marry someday. He proposes introducing her to one of the male servants if Bernard has no such intentions. Bernard darkly replies that he won't marry her. Orline challenges him, asking if he plans to keep her in his house forever. The conversation pivots to Bernard's own marital prospects. Orline asks if it isn't time Bernard considered marriage for himself. Bernard deflects, claiming it is a bit too early, but Orline counters that thinking about it early isn't bad. Orline presses him on his preferences. Bernard admits he has no specific preferences but mentions he's heard beautiful women are expensive to maintain, so he'd rather avoid that. He states he would prefer a woman who expresses her opinions clearly, as it makes things easier, but finds it awkward if she is too quiet. Conversely, he doesn't feel comfortable around talkative women. Orline listens, smiling, and notes that having ideals is fine but one shouldn't forget reality, realizing Bernard's contradictory standards paint a difficult path. Bernard sighs, wondering if he has reached the age where he must worry about such things, reflecting that knights are expected to serve as examples to the people by having stable families. Bernard returns to the mansion entrance, weary from the day's work. Agnes greets him with a warm, "Welcome back, my lord." He notices she is wearing a new outfit and asks if the uniforms arrived today. Agnes beams, spinning to show off the new official servant uniform he bought for her. She asks if it looks great on her. Bernard freezes, his eyes widening in shock. In a flashback, he reveals his internal logic. Simply braiding her hair wasn't enough to conceal her, so he ordered her to wear clothes resembling those of elderly women to hide her figure. He expected a frumpy, concealing look. However, the reality stands before him. The elderly uniform fits Agnes tightly, accentuating her curves and chest in a way that is anything but concealing. Agnes thanks him for the new uniform. Bernard struggles to speak, coughing to clear his throat. He awkwardly tries to explain that the uniform isn't having the intended effect. He stammers that it's not appropriate for him to comment on a woman's body, but she doesn't need to worry about her figure. Agnes, misinterpreting his awkwardness again, fears she looks plump because she heard maids don't wear corsets. Bernard corrects her, mentally screaming that the problem is her shapely, attractive body stands out too much for a simple maid. Agnes hangs her head in shame, apologizing for being embarrassing and plump. Bernard aggressively counters that of course that would stand out, but quickly pivots to tell her not to be timid or hunch her back, as that draws even more attention. He tells her to be confident at all times. Realizing the uniform disguise has failed to make her invisible, Bernard concludes they need one more small adjustment. Bernard grabs Agnes's hands and inspects them. He notices they are covered in blisters. He asks if Jigel told her to work that hard, but Agnes denies it. She explains that she ends up gripping the broom too tightly without meaning to because her eyesight is weak and she can't see the dust or dirt clearly. Bernard realizes this explains her clumsiness and the blisters. He declares that she needs to wear glasses. Bernard explains that glasses are the perfect disguise tool because no one would suspect a noble lady to wear them. He adds that her eyesight is affecting her daily work, so it is a necessity. Agnes is shocked, protesting that glasses are far too expensive and she cannot afford them. Bernard offers to lend her the money, suggesting she can pay it back in installments from her salary since she will be staying there from now on. They begin to discuss the logistics of the purchase. Orline, who wears glasses himself, joins the conversation. Agnes asks how much his glasses cost. Orline reveals he paid about 3 gold coins for them at a shop called Rainbow Hall in the Commoners District. Bernard flinches at the price, shouting, "3?" A text box reveals that Agnes's monthly salary is only 1 gold coin, making the expense massive relative to her income. Orline calmly explains that in the Commoners District, that is the normal price, whereas shops in the Central District charge double. Agnes trembles at the cost, asking if that is considered expensive. Bernard, sweating but resigned to the necessity of the disguise and her health, sighs and says there is no helping it. The bell above the door chimes as Bernard steps into Rainbow Hall, the finest optician in the royal capital. He approaches the counter, his demeanor stiff as he surveys the overwhelming array of eyewear on display. He requests advice on glasses for nearsightedness, hoping to find something suitable for Agnes without revealing her identity. The clerk, noting Bernard's intense focus, cheerfully assumes the purchase is for his wife. Bernard flinches at the word, wife, a flush rising to his cheeks, but he chooses not to correct the assumption, realizing it provides a convenient cover. The clerk begins his recommendations, presenting a pair of opera glasses popular among noble ladies for watching stage performances. Bernard rejects them immediately, clarifying he needs something for daily use. The clerk then suggests a pair of nose glasses, pince-nez, claiming they are affordable and convenient for reading. Bernard envisions Agnes working. He calculates that such a design would slip off if she moved too much during her maid duties, so he demands something more stable. Finally, the clerk presents a pair of wire-rimmed glasses with ear hooks. He warns they cost a little more, but they are secure and highly rated. Bernard approves of the design but attempts to negotiate a home sales service, hoping to keep Agnes hidden within the mansion. The clerk refuses flatly, citing the shop's philosophy that customers must visit in person to find the perfect fit. Defeated by the shopkeeper's principles, Bernard walks through the city streets, his mind racing with logistical problems. He needs to bring Agnes into the heart of the capital to fit the glasses, but she is a wanted fugitive with active pursuers. He concludes that bringing her in openly is impossible, they must use a disguise. Back at the mansion, Bernard consults with Orline in the parlor. Orline dismisses the idea of cross-dressing Agnes as a man, arguing it wouldn't suit her. Instead, he proposes the most natural option. They should pretend to be a married couple. Bernard protests, asking if such a charade is really necessary. Orline counters that it creates a natural cover. Even if they appear awkward, onlookers would simply assume they are newlyweds. However, Orline critiques Bernard's demeanor, noting that he shows his true, intense personality too strongly. He insists that Bernard needs training to act the part of a husband, specifically to create a convincing atmosphere with Agnes. The training begins immediately. Agnes enters the room, dressed in her maid uniform, and attempts to play the role of the wife. She stiffly greets Lord Bernard. Orline interrupts, correcting her behavior. He instructs her to speak more naturally and tells her she doesn't need to stand up from her seat when her husband enters. He then turns to Bernard, ordering him to greet his wife properly in the morning. They attempt the interaction again. Agnes murmurs a greeting, her eyes glued to the floor. Bernard responds with a strained, "Good morning." The air in the room grows heavy with unbearable awkwardness. Orline watches them, exasperated, noting that the atmosphere has become even more tense than before. Desperate to salvage the simulation, Bernard grabs a book from the shelf, suggesting they simply spend time together in the same room to build familiarity. He asks Agnes which book she wants. As he moves to hand it to her, the sheer pressure of the intimacy and the roleplay proves too much for her constitution. Agnes's eyes roll back, and she collapses, fainting dead away from the stress. Orline retreats to the kitchen, exhausted by the disastrous training session. He confides in Alan, the chef, admitting that while he suggested the plan, he is not exactly a role model for romance. He reflects that usually, a shared meal helps people bond, but his profession as a chef often distracts him. Alan, listening to the dilemma, offers a brilliant alternative: the snow festival in Rindo Village. Alan explains that Rindo Village is about 3 hours from the capital. Once a year, they host a snow festival where attendees wear masks or animal hoods to protect against the cold. This custom naturally conceals faces, making it nearly impossible for anyone to recognize a fugitive. Furthermore, the festival attracts huge crowds, providing excellent cover. Orline realizes this is the perfect solution. A woman in the kitchen, presumably Jigel, adds another layer to the plan. She suggests they set up a stall to sell goods. She reasons that if they frame the trip as a financial opportunity to help the castle's budget, Bernard will definitely agree. She embraces Eric, Orline, praising him for being such a clever child, while Orline simply feels relieved that the problem has a solution. Later, in the parlor, the household staff presents the plan to Bernard. They propose setting up a stall selling herbal cakes, a combination of Dominic's medicinal expertise and Alan's baking. The cakes are healthy, low in sugar, and pair well with wine, a treat once popular among noble ladies. Bernard listens to the logic, acknowledging that the quality is guaranteed. He agrees to the plan but imposes one condition: Agnes must join him in selling the goods at the stall. When Bernard breaks the news to Agnes, her reaction is immediate and radiant. She clasps her hands together, beaming with pure joy at the prospect of the outing. Bernard watches her, struck by the transformation. He realizes that she is usually tense and reserved in his presence, but today she is genuinely happy. A soft smile touches his lips as he watches her excitement, internally wishing that things could stay like this forever and that he could freely show her this true, softer side of himself. The chapter closes with a view of the snowy kingdom, the promise of the festival offering a brief respite from their perilous reality. The narrative opens amidst the jostling interior of a moving carriage, where the lively chatter of children surrounds a woman who finds herself trading places with another due to sheer enthusiasm. The atmosphere inside is chaotic, with young voices clamoring about allowances and cute packaging, their excitement bubbling over regarding a candy that has recently surged in popularity within the city. A stern voice attempts to quell the noise, reminding the children not to shout in public, while another pleads for the driver to slow down. The journey is marked by a peculiar arrangement. Inside the carriage, a woman laments that she ended up switching spots because Jigel was overly enthusiastic and noisy, leading to this current predicament. She sighs, her gaze drifting toward the front of the vehicle, questioning the absurdity of the situation where the Lord himself has taken up the reins to act as the driver. The carriage halts, and a voice announces their arrival at the destination. Upon disembarking, the group finds themselves immersed in the vibrant atmosphere of the snow festival in Rindo village. The scene is a bustling tapestry of winter celebration, with stalls adorned with festive decor and attendees donning whimsical animal costumes. Agnes, her face obscured by a large mask, marvels at the spectacle, her posture radiating excitement as she remarks on the cuteness of the surroundings. However, the sheer density of the crowd immediately threatens to swallow her, causing a companion to shout a warning not to get lost. The head maid observes Agnes, noting that the young woman looks completely overwhelmed by the throng of people. Nearby, a masked man, Lord Bernard, scans the area, searching for his charge. The maid expresses a fleeting wish that the men could have joined them in the festivities, but practicality rules the day. There is luggage to manage, and the logistics of the event take precedence. She resolves that they must sell as much as possible to ensure everyone's happiness. Suddenly, the chaotic movement of the crowd causes a collision. Agnes, disoriented by her large mask, stumbles, but Bernard swiftly intercepts her fall. He dismisses her apologies, attributing the mishap to the cumbersome mask she wears. While this rescue unfolds, the maid observes from a distance, her internal monologue revealing the true depth of their scheme. She acknowledges that to Lord Bernard, this excursion might appear as a frivolous whim of the servants, but the reality is far more calculated. The participation in the snow festival serves a dual purpose. Primarily, it is a strategic step to acclimatize Agnes to public spaces so she can eventually travel to the city with peace of mind to purchase glasses. However, the maid clenches her fist with determination as she mentally declares the ultimate goal, to foster the atmosphere of a real married couple and bring the two of them closer together. The scene shifts to the setup of their stall. Bernard, donning a bare-eared hood and mask to match Agnes's cat-eared attire, shivers in the biting cold. The maid pins the success of the day on him, urging him to do his best, while Agnes meticulously arranges the display of goods. Bernard compliments her skill, and Agnes reveals that she gained experience from organizing charity markets at the orphanage. Agnes inquires about the name of their temporary establishment, prompting the reveal of a sign that reads, "The Kitten and the Little Bear," a shop destined to exist for just one day. Just as Agnes prepares to settle into work, Bernard intervenes, insisting that she and the Lord should go enjoy the festival first. Agnes attempts to protest, offering to help, but the maid cuts her off, commanding them to leave the shop management to the staff for the afternoon. The maid's directive is clear: they must sell everything and make a huge profit, as the festival competition will be decided by morning. She encourages them to make the most of this rare festival while the excitement is high. Agnes hesitates, asking if they are truly sure about this arrangement, but Bernard ushers her away. As they depart, the maid watches Agnes disappear into the crowd with alarming speed, noting that it is her first time at a village festival, which explains her propensity for getting into situations. Bernard calls out to Agnes, instructing her not to wander too far from him. True to the maid's prediction, Agnes becomes separated almost instantly. She stands alone, trembling, admitting she got lost and didn't know which way to go. Bernard finds her, his presence looming over a bear-costumed bystander, and reassures her that her confusion is merely a result of being unaccustomed to such crowds. Agnes thanks him profusely, her relief palpable. To prevent a recurrence, Bernard offers a solution. He instructs her to hold onto his coat while they walk. Agnes timidly grips the fabric of his sleeve, and they proceed through the festival together. As they navigate the stalls, Agnes observes the abundance of sweet treats available. Bernard acknowledges this, admitting that he doesn't dislike sweets and consumes them from time to time. This prompts Agnes to ask if he likes them, to which he agrees, suggesting they buy something for lunch as the scent of food wafts through the air. Agnes internally notes the truth, that he genuinely likes sweets, and eagerly points to a stall, asking if she can try a specific item. The search for a place to eat proves difficult, as the festival grounds are packed and there are no open seats. Bernard scans the area and makes a pragmatic decision. He approaches a large tree and spreads his fine coat directly onto the snowy ground, instructing Agnes to sit there. Agnes is horrified by the action, stammering about the impropriety of sitting on his coat and the ground itself. Bernard brushes off her concern, assuring her that no one can see them in this secluded spot and telling her not to worry about the coat. He also gently suggests she take off her mask. Agnes remains frozen in shock, unable to comprehend the breach of etiquette. Seeing her reaction, Bernard bursts into laughter, realizing that she has never eaten while sitting on the ground before. He apologizes for laughing but explains that her reaction reminded him of his past. He recounts his days as a trainee in the Knights Corps, where his senior comrades used to tease him mercilessly when he looked for tables and chairs after cooking duty. He recalls standing in the training yard, plate in hand, confused by the lack of furniture. He imparts a lesson he learned back then. It is all about the experience, and she should simply relax, sit down, and eat. Agnes, still hesitant, admits she doesn't really know how to eat in such a manner. Bernard playfully scolds her to stop staring and start eating, demonstrating by taking a bite of a large, bread-like food item himself. Agnes watches him, then tentatively takes a bite of her own food. Her eyes widen as the flavor hits her, and she exclaims to Lord Bernard that it is delicious. Meanwhile, back at the stall, the afternoon has passed. The servants stand amidst empty crates, marveling that they sold almost everything. The maid expresses disbelief that she was originally just a maid, surprised by her own latent talent for sales. A customer approaches, hoping to buy something, but is told that the shop was a one-time event, much to their disappointment as they praise the deliciousness of the goods. The servants discuss the aftermath, noting that the inventory didn't even last 30 minutes. They reflect that they should have made more, but concede that doing so would have caused Alan, the cook, to collapse from exhaustion. Still, the reputation of the shop was stellar, and people kept asking where to buy the goods regularly, a fact they decide will make Alan very happy despite his fatigue. As the day winds down, Bernard and Agnes sit together in a quiet corner. Bernard mentions he feels hungry again. Agnes offers to get something to eat, but Bernard stops her, fearing she might get lost again. Instead, he produces a glass jar filled with white, egg-shaped sweets. He admits he wanted to tie a ribbon around it before giving it to her but ran out of time. He presents the jar to her, stating he bought it specifically for her. He explains that the sweets are almonds coated in sugar. Agnes accepts the jar and tastes one of the sweets. She remarks that although it is her first time seeing it, the taste feels strangely familiar. She describes the sensation of the crisp sugar coating mixing pleasantly with the flavor of the roasted almond. Suddenly, a memory surfaces. She realizes she had this sweet at her eldest brother's wedding banquet. She recalls getting scolded by her mother for eating too many of them. Bernard confirms her memory, explaining that the sweet is called dragée and is a traditional confection served at celebratory occasions, often during pre-wedding tea. Agnes asks if he remembers eating them, but Bernard shakes his head, stating he doesn't remember that at all. He muses that as a child he would put anything into his mouth, even eating wild grasses without hesitation, relying on Dominic to tell him which ones were safe. His thoughts turn introspective as he discusses marriage. He notes that all three of his brothers are married through arranged unions, and everything went smoothly for them. He observes that they all seemed genuinely happy, which leads him to question what truly forms the bond of a married couple, and how two complete strangers can become so close. Bernard stares at the jar of dragée, wondering if a day will ever come when he understands that connection. Agnes, sensing the weight of his thoughts, asks why he gave her this specific sweet. Bernard reveals that dragée has a special meaning. It represents a wish for the seeds of happiness to bloom. Agnes is struck by the sentiment, her cheeks flushing as she processes his words in silence. From a distance, the servants observe the pair. One claims to have heard something drop, perhaps signifying a shift in the relationship, but the other dismisses it, suggesting they only got a little more comfortable with each other. They analyze the progress, concluding that it isn't much. The head maid offers a philosophical perspective, noting that if the seasons changed all at once, neither the heart nor the body could keep up. She likens the development of love to the arrival of spring. It comes slowly, bit by bit, warming the air until the season finally arrives. They agree that spring is still far away and decide that they should stop meddling quite so much, resolving to wait patiently for the seeds to sprout on their own. The storefront of a city establishment marked clearly as an optician, where Lord Bernard and Agnes have arrived to address her struggle with poor eyesight. Inside, Agnes stands before a mirror, tentatively adjusting a new pair of round-rimmed spectacles. She stammers a shy confirmation that the glasses are good, prompting the shopkeeper to highlight that while the model is slightly older, it fits their budget perfectly at the cost of a single gold coin. Bernard, decisive and practical, immediately agrees to the deal. The shopkeeper, observing the pair, remarks that the lenses are thick but assures Agnes they are not heavy enough to cause worry. He recalls Bernard's careful scrutiny during a previous visit and compliments them, declaring what a truly well-matched couple they appear to be. Agnes flushes at the comment, stammering her thanks as they exit the shop. Outside, Bernard notes that all that remains is to return to the palace. However, the streets have swelled with people, a result of a famous performance at the nearby theater drawing a massive crowd. Recognizing the difficulty of navigating the throng, Bernard decides there is no other choice and instructs Agnes that they will walk a little way to meet the carriage. To ensure they are not separated, he takes her hand, guiding her through the bustling street. As they walk hand in hand, Agnes questions Bernard about his composure, admitting she thought he never suffered from nerves given his position in the knighthood and his confidence at the shop. Bernard shatters this perception, confessing that he gets nervous just like anyone else. He recalls a specific instance during his promotion exam interview where he turned so pale that Jigel worried for his health. He reveals his unique coping mechanism, biting down on hard candy with his back molars to calm himself. Agnes presses for details on how he manages to bite such hard candy, but Bernard explains he cannot demonstrate as he currently has none with him. He notes that he usually carries it to give to her whenever she feels hungry. Suddenly, a voice cuts through the crowd, calling out for Bernard to wait. Bernard freezes, recognizing the voice of his colleague, Julian. In a swift, defensive motion, Bernard pulls his cape over Agnes, completely shielding her from view. Julian catches up, breathless and loud, demanding to know why Bernard was ignoring him. Julian's eyes widen in shock as he realizes Bernard is escorting a girl. He teases Bernard, assuming this must be a secret mission or a date, and loudly asks for an introduction to the kind of girl who would go out with him. Bernard remains silent and unyielding, keeping Agnes hidden. Julian, sensing he is intruding on something private, backs off, wishing Bernard luck and telling him to take care of the young lady before departing. Once Julian disappears, Bernard apologizes to Agnes for wrinkling her jacket but explains the necessity of the action. He grimly notes that Julian knows Agnes's face, or at least would recognize her, and if her identity were revealed in the city, the consequences could be unpredictable. To soothe her shaken nerves, Bernard produces a piece of candy, instructing her to treat it as the embodiment of her worries and consume it. Agnes obeys, crunching the sweet loudly and swallowing it, declaring it gone. Her intensity causes Bernard to burst into laughter, which flusters Agnes further. Continuing their stroll, they arrive in a quieter area which Bernard identifies as a commoner's district, a place where nobles rarely venture. He points out a shop filled with books, explaining it is a rental shop, as books are a luxury for commoners who prefer to borrow rather than buy. Agnes asks if they can enter, and Bernard agrees. Inside, Agnes is awestruck by the sheer volume of books. She notes the dust and the nostalgia, remarking that she used to read these stories as a child. Donning her new glasses, she marvels at how clear everything looks. She scans the shelves and gasps upon discovering The Adventures of the Bear Knight, realizing there are many more volumes than the 7 her tutor had provided her. Bernard encourages her to borrow them, stating he will pay the rental fee. When Agnes protests, wishing to pay for her own books, Bernard insists, framing the expense as a repayment for her future promotion. Leaving the bookshop with her treasures, Agnes beams, promising to do her best at work. While waiting for Dominic to bring the carriage, the scent of madeleines catches their attention. They decide to buy a box as souvenirs, reasoning that if they return empty-handed, the twins and Jigel might complain. Bernard calculates that the box contains 7 pieces, which means 1 will be left over. He hands the extra madeleine to Agnes, playfully calling it a bribe to keep their outing a secret. As the carriage arrives, Bernard watches her eat, dryly noting that madeleines absorb all the moisture in one's mouth, before signaling it is time to leave. Inside a grand hallway of the estate, Lord Bernard stands waiting, his posture stiff as he converses with Jigel. Jigel remarks that Agnes will arrive shortly, explaining that she merely returned to retrieve her glasses. Moments later, the sound of hurried footsteps echoes against the floorboards as a figure dashes into view. Agnes arrives, breathless, apologizing for the delay. Bernard's brow furrows in confusion, questioning why Jigel referred to her openly by her real name, Agnes, given the circumstances. Agnes stands before them, transformed. She frets over her appearance, asking if her disguise is effective. She has followed orders meticulously, donning a plain maid's uniform, altering her hairstyle, and wearing large, round-rimmed glasses to obscure her features. To an objective observer, she appears as nothing more than a plain, unnoticed servant. However, as Bernard gazes down at her, his internal composure cracks. Despite the attempt at plainness, the sight of her looking up at him with those eyes strikes him as undeniably adorable, causing him to flush and cover his face in a futile attempt to hide his reaction. The narrative perspective shifts to Bernard's internal resolve. He recalls sitting on a bench, guarding her, reminding himself that this disguise is a necessary stratagem to protect Agnes from any visitors who might come to the house. The fake Lady Agnes incident remains a looming threat, and she is still under strict surveillance. He steels himself with the knowledge that if her true identity were discovered and the house attacked, it would spell the end. He vows silently to never let their enemies win. Later, in the study, Agnes finishes her cleaning duties with remarkable speed. She beams with accomplishment, noting that her new glasses allowed her to work more efficiently than usual. Jigel interrupts her celebration, noting that her efficiency has created a surplus of time. He proposes a new mission, for Agnes to take on a new job. He explains that Lord Bernard is secretly fond of sweets but feels too embarrassed to eat them openly, fearing he is being watched. Jigel recalls that Bernard became flustered when confronted about his sweet tooth previously. Thus, the Feed the Lord Sweets plan is born. Jigel assigns Agnes the role of the one in charge of the Lord's sweets, reasoning that if she makes them, Bernard will be unable to refuse. Agnes accepts the mission with enthusiasm, seeing it as a way to force the Lord to take necessary breaks. Agnes enters the kitchen, where she is introduced to her culinary instructors, the twin maids, Syria and Carol. The twins, brimming with energy, announce that they will teach her to make something simple, cheap, and tasty. Agnes admits her inexperience and fear of causing trouble, but the twins reassure her that they make sweets themselves to save money. They begin a guessing game for the recipe. The first hint involves flour and a flat frying pan. Agnes guesses pancakes, but the answer is incorrect. The second hint describes a food that goes crunch crunch when eaten. The answer is revealed to be stone slab cookies. The twins present the recipe: flour, butter, milk, sugar, egg, and maple syrup. They instruct Agnes to melt the butter slightly, then mix in the sugar and syrup. Once the remaining ingredients are added, the twins reveal their chaotic method. They skip the dough resting phase entirely because they are too impatient to wait. Instead, they knead the dough non-stop and immediately roll it out. They forego molds, opting to cut the dough into squares with a knife before baking them on a hot pan. When the cookies are finished, they are rectangular, rustic slabs. Bernard returns home and is greeted by the maids presenting the stone slabs. He recognizes them immediately, noting that while the name fits, they are notoriously hard. One of the maids explains that while delicious and warm initially, they harden like rocks over time. She proudly claims that chewing these hard cookies has well-trained the jaws of everyone in the household, including the Lord. Agnes, determined to perfect her mission, takes diligent notes on how to modify the recipe for Bernard. She plans to add baking powder and let the dough rest for 2 hours to create a softer batch specifically for him. Watching her scribble notes with such dedication, Bernard thinks to himself that she is truly a good girl and that he is lucky to have her. The scene transitions to the corridors of authority. Bernard encounters Vice Captain Johann Brondel. Brondel addresses Bernard informally, noting that Captain Lazar left early. He pivots the conversation to the recent arrest operation at the luxury brothel, praising it as a splendid success that impressed the higher-ups. Bernard attempts to remain humble, but Brondel insists on sharing a piece of classified information known only to a handful of senior officials. Brondel reveals a grim turn of events. The brothel managers arrested during the incident were found dead in their prison cells before they could yield any useful information regarding the brothel or the fake Lady Agnes. Since they died in custody, the knighthood suspects the perpetrator is an insider, one of their own knights or someone connected to them. Brondel emphasizes that this corruption is precisely why they are placing their hopes in Bernard, citing his pure spirit and devotion to knighthood as the pride of their order. Bernard pledges to give his all to the cause. As Bernard departs, he is intercepted by a flamboyant young man named Ernest Vanderlmen. Ernest introduces himself as the son of Marquis Vanderlmen, the Minister of Finance, and notes his father's support for the knights. Bernard observes Ernest closely as the noble walks away, categorizing him as someone moving in the shadows. Bernard's internal monologue connects the dots. The drug scandal, the appearance of the fake Lady Agnes, and the murder of the brothel owners all point to someone finding the brothel's existence inconvenient. He deduces that the criminal has a specific, personal interest in Agnes herself, likely intending to keep her hidden away as a mistress. Ernest doubles back, catching Bernard off guard. He arrogantly claims that his sharp intuition led Bernard to the brothel and demands gratitude for his special invitation that allowed the knights to sneak in. Bernard stares at him, realizing this man is the fool he suspects, yet acknowledging that such men are countless in noble society. Ernest then extends a new invitation. He asks Bernard to accompany him to an auction later that day. He explains that the Vanderlmen family received a special invitation to this event hosted by a Grand Duke, where confiscated government goods are sold to a select few nobles. Bernard attempts to decline, telling Ernest to go by himself. However, Ernest baits the hook with an irresistible lure. He insists there is an extremely rare item that Bernard cannot afford to miss. With a dramatic flair, Ernest reveals the item in question, Lady Agnes's mother's wedding dress. The revelation strikes Bernard with the force of a physical blow, leaving him stunned. The bustling streets of a city, where a carriage traverses the cobblestones beneath a sky overlooked by towering spires. Inside, Lord Bernard sits opposite Ernest, having accepted an invitation to attend an auction hosted by the Duke. While Bernard exhales a heavy sigh, appearing reserved, Ernest radiates excitement, leaning forward with a flushed face to express his thrill at Bernard's presence, claiming it provides him with great reassurance. Bernard, inwardly focused, acknowledges that his own resistance crumbled solely because he learned that the wedding dress belonging to Agnes's mother would be placed on the block. Ernest declares his absolute intention to win the dress that day, his fist clenched in determination. When Bernard questions the necessity of his presence, pointing out that winning alone changes nothing, Ernest counters that solitary victory lacks fun and that the joy of accomplishment requires an audience to share in it. He insists, with a piercing stare, that this witness must be Bernard and no one else. Bernard dismisses the sentiment as disgusting. Unperturbed, Ernest pivots to the lore surrounding the item, asking if Bernard knows the history of the dress's owner. He recounts that Agnes's mother was famed among the nobility not merely for her beauty or her hair that shone like silk, but for a specific title, the Golden Princess. Bernard notes the gravity of the name, learning that it stemmed from more than just aesthetics. Ernest explains that Agnes's family, once a simple and unremarkable house, rose to prosperity because their lands contained a mine rich in gold and minerals. Although the gold ran out by the time Agnes's mother was a child, noble society refused to believe the flow had ceased, accusing the family of hoarding gold bars to evade royal taxes. Thus, she bore the moniker, the princess who possesses a fortune in gold. Since she passed away while Agnes was young, a superstition took root, that the man who wins her hand, or her legacy, becomes the happiest person in the world. Ernest concludes his tale with a possessive declaration that he wants Agnes to be his, a statement that prompts Bernard to realize exactly why he finds the man so repulsive. The carriage halts, and they disembark in front of a grand, palace-like structure, intending to hurry inside. At the entrance, an attendant presents them with masks, explaining that special dress rules require all attendees to hide their faces to prevent trouble among buyers. Bernard finds the anonymity suspicious, noting that in state auctions, this secrecy ensures no one knows who bought what. Ernest gleefully dons a feathered mask, preening and asking for compliments, while Bernard, wearing a simple black domino mask, distances himself, repulsed by the idea of being seen with him. They enter the venue, which is more crowded than usual. Bernard observes the attendees, deducing their identities despite the disguises. He identifies a lady from high nobility by her posture, a knight by his gait, and a merchant by his soft hands. He remarks to Ernest that professional habits betray identities regardless of masks. The auctioneer opens the event from a stage, welcoming the masked crowd to the blessed occasion. The first item, a jeweled necklace known as the Mermaid's Tears, is presented. Ernest explains the system. One raises a numbered paddle to make an offer, and the price climbs until a sole bidder remains. Ernest holds paddle number 52. As bidding wars erupt over brooches and jewelry, Bernard watches the prices soar to 30 and 37 gold coins, internally lamenting that his entire monthly salary is a mere 5 gold coins. He feels the stark distance between this world of exorbitant wealth and his own reality. Finally, the main attraction arrives, the wedding dress of the saint's mother, described as blessed by God with purity and grace. Ernest steels himself, declaring he will obtain it regardless of the cost. However, the opening price skyrockets immediately, shocking the room. A fierce bidding war ensues between Ernest, paddle 52, and a mystery man, paddle 1. The price climbs rapidly to 90, then 100 gold coins. Ernest sweats profusely, realizing his limit is near, while his opponent remains calm. Desperate and losing composure, Ernest breaks the cardinal rule of the secret auction. He shouts his title as the vice-captain of the 2nd Battalion to intimidate his rival. Bernard instantly clamps a hand over Ernest's mouth, reprimanding him for the idiocy of shouting his name in a secret venue. Bernard's mind drifts to his own motivation. He recalls Agnes's desire to wear that dress, her dream of emulating her mother's beauty on her own wedding day. He despairs at his lack of funds, wishing for a benefactor to lend him the money so he could preserve that dream. The bidding hits 115 gold coins, led by paddle 1. Ernest collapses in defeat. Just as the item is about to be sold, a new voice pierces the air, offering 150 gold coins. The room erupts in shock at the astronomical sum. The auctioneer confirms the bid, and the gavel falls, awarding the dress to paddle number 95. Bernard turns his gaze toward the winner. Even through the mask, he recognizes the person's character by their demeanor. The winner is a woman with an intricate mask and a chilling smile, whom Bernard identifies with a heavy realization as Mother, the owner of the dress. The agonizing wails of Ernest, who throws his head back in theatrical despair, his hands clutching at his hair as he laments his failure to win the auction. He screams that his emotional approach plan has completely gone up in flames, his body contorting with the frustration of the loss. While Ernest mourns the successful conclusion of the Duke's auction, the other attendees begin to filter out towards the second part of the event, a masquerade social party. Bernard stands amidst the chaos, looking utterly drained by his companion's antics. However, a sudden wave of nausea hits Bernard, draining the color from his face. He clutches his mouth, muttering that he feels unwell and intends to head home immediately. Ernest, oblivious to Bernard's physical distress, grabs him, demanding they investigate the identity of the woman who won the dress. Ernest is baffled, having assumed the final bidding war would be between himself and the other noblemen, only to be blindsided when a mystery woman snatched the item for an exorbitant 150 gold coins. Ernest spots the winner and charges forward, shouting for her to wait. Bernard attempts to restrain him, but his eyes widen behind his mask as he recognizes the woman's bearing. Ernest, lacking all social grace, demands to know who she is, while Bernard, seized by a sudden, terrifying realization, tries to silence him. Bernard realizes he knows exactly who she is, though he desperately wants to believe he is mistaken. The woman turns, her presence commanding even behind her mask. She addresses Bernard directly, asking if the mask prevents him from recognizing her. Bernard, defeated, stammers out the word, "Mother." The woman removes her mask, revealing the elegant, smiling face of Bernard's mother, while the young woman beside her reveals herself as Ingrid, his sister-in-law. His mother chides him playfully, calling him a heartless son. She swiftly ignores his shock, announcing that she has finished the arrangements and suggesting they have tea together to catch up. Moments later, the group sits in a lavish drawing room. Ingrid covers her mouth, giggling uncontrollably, remarking that Bernard was absolutely hilarious moments ago. She claims that seeing them made his knees buckle to the point of collapse, interpreting his shock as overwhelming happiness. Bernard, slumped in his chair with his soul leaving his body, internally declares this situation a nightmare. An older butler serves them, and Ingrid orders 2 hot milk coffees with melted chocolate, noting Bernard's fondness for sweet things. Bernard's mother gazes at him with maternal warmth, commenting that he has truly grown into a man, a fact that makes her a little sad. She begins to reminisce about how cute and gentle he was when they first met, prompting a flustered Bernard to shout for her to stop digging up old stories. The narrative shifts to explain Ingrid's presence. She is the wife of Bernard's eldest brother, Robert. Bernard recalls that she grew up among sisters and always desired a younger brother, leading her to shower him with excessive affection since childhood, as he is 10 years her junior. Despite her kindness, Bernard remembers her as a terrifyingly strong woman, recalling a specific picnic where she hunted a wild boar, the meat of which was delicious. Returning to the present, Bernard's mother expresses her joy at seeing him well, admitting she has felt a great emptiness since he left for the capital. She mentions that her other children accompanied her to the capital and are eager to see him. However, her tone shifts to one of playful accusation. She states she was impressed by him today because he fought so passionately to win the dress for his fiancée. Bernard attempts to deny this, claiming it was a coincidence, but his mother presses on, describing his bidding war as a sight to behold, a man fighting for the one he loves. Cornered, Bernard drops his defenses. He admits he doesn't fully understand what love is, but he felt strongly that the dress should return to its rightful home. He confesses his simple wish, that the owner of that dress would keep smiling forever. His mother smiles gently, deeply moved by his maturity. Bernard then questions why they were at the auction in the first place. His mother explains she used her father's name to gain entry. She reveals that her family, the Auchins, is one of the 12 greatest merchant houses on the continent and one of the largest trading families in the country. Her father was an exceptionally skilled merchant who amassed an enormous fortune. The conversation turns to the exorbitant cost of the dress. Bernard asks where she obtained the money. His mother casually reveals a shocking secret: the money she used was actually his. She explains that 3 years ago, before his death, his grandfather gave each grandchild a pre-inheritance gift of 500 gold coins. Since Bernard had already joined the Knight Corps, they kept it a secret. She recounts a cautionary tale about his third brother, Louis, who used his share for a business venture that collapsed within a year, losing the entire 500 coins. Fearing a similar fate for the others, she decided to manage the remaining children's funds personally and strictly. Bernard is stunned into silence, realizing he has been wealthy all along while living on a monthly salary of 5 gold coins. His mother assures him that the money is his, and she will hand it over immediately if he needs it. Bernard, overwhelmed, asks her to keep caring for it for now. He apologizes for using his money without asking, but Bernard reassures her that it is fine, relieved that the dress is in safe hands and that he doesn't have to worry about debt. Just as Bernard relaxes, Ingrid strikes with a new topic. She brings up the fake fiancé rumor, mentioning she heard the girl is actually a maid who is madly in love with Bernard. Ingrid gushes about how sweet the girl must be for everyone at the mansion to respect her, and she expresses a burning desire to see this girl who captured Bernard's heart with her own eyes. She notes that they rarely come to the capital and asks if Bernard is free tomorrow, declaring it the perfect opportunity for a visit. Bernard realizes the gravity of the situation. He rushes back to his estate, bursting through the doors to find Agnes. Sweat pours down his face as he confronts her with the impending crisis. He informs her that his mother and sister-in-law are coming to the estate tomorrow. With a desperate, serious expression, he drops to one knee and implores her with a single, critical question: "Can you be my fiancée again?" A frantic Bernard lamenting his current predicament. He throws his hands up in despair, realizing that he has to go to work today, despite the impending arrival of his mother and sister-in-law. Agnes tries to reassure him with a cheerful smile, though sweat beads on her brow. She comments that if the master were home, things would have been even better, but Bernard can only manage a weak, pained laugh in response. The scene shifts to the grand entrance of the estate. The servants are lined up, apologizing profusely for not being fully prepared due to the sudden nature of the visit, but promising to do their utmost to assist. A carriage arrives and 2 women step out. One is an older, elegant lady, Bernard's mother, and the other is a younger, vibrant woman, Ingrid, his sister-in-law. Agnes, standing nervously in her disguise as the fiancée, thinks to herself that she didn't expect to play this role so soon. She recalls the lie about her being a maid in love with Bernard and braces herself for the deception. Bernard's mother greets her warmly, expressing how happy she is to see Agnes again. Ingrid joins in, beaming with excitement, declaring that she must be the perfect fiancée. The group moves to a drawing room for tea. Bernard's mother gazes at Agnes with affection, confessing that she has been thinking about her all this time. Agnes, flustered, tries to maintain her composure. The mother continues, expressing relief that Agnes looks healthy and hasn't suffered any exhaustion or discouragement, emphasizing that Agnes is an extremely important member of their family. Suddenly, Bernard's mother pulls Agnes into a warm embrace. Agnes freezes, then blushes deeply. She stammers that she's sorry if she's being too affectionate, but Agnes quietly admits that it's fine. In a moment of vulnerability, Agnes whispers that the embrace unintentionally reminded her of her own mother. Bernard's mother smiles gently, apologizing for the unexpected emotion but admitting she was truly happy when Agnes hugged her back. Ingrid watches the scene with delight, gushing to herself about how sweet Agnes is and how she's far too good for Bernard. She introduces herself formally as Ingrid Orleans, Bernard's sister-in-law, and apologizes for her late greeting. Agnes introduces herself as Agnes Liverge, and they exchange pleasantries. The conversation turns to the future. Bernard's mother, filled with enthusiasm, declares that the wedding must be held in the capital. She lists the benefits: the newest wedding gowns, the most famous halls, and the finest food. She insists that even people from the provinces dream of visiting the capital at least once for such an occasion. Agnes, feeling the weight of the lie pressing down on her, hesitates. When asked for her opinion, she tentatively suggests that if she could have her wish, she would like the wedding to be held in Lord Bernard's hometown. She explains that she has been confined to the capital her whole life and knows little of the outside world, so a wedding in the place where Bernard grew up sounds truly wonderful. Bernard's mother and Ingrid are touched by this sentiment. They agree that it's a lovely idea. However, the mother then drops a bombshell. She announces that she will start the preparations right away. The conversation escalates rapidly, with talk of the wedding advancing faster than ever before. Agnes panics internally, realizing the situation is spiraling out of control. Later, Bernard returns home, bursting through the doors still in his knight's uniform, breathless and apologetic for his lateness. He asks Jigel where his mother and sister-in-law are, only to be told they have already left. He is shocked, having expected them to stay longer. Jigel explains that they came to town to buy clothes for Agnes and seemed absolutely delighted, promising to visit again tomorrow. Bernard is confused by the pile of gifts left behind. He spots a dress among them and realizes with a jolt that it must be Agnes's mother's wedding gown. He deduces that his mother and Ingrid were merely observing the situation today and plans to bring the special dress tomorrow. He thanks Jigel for saving the situation and rushes to find Agnes. He finds Agnes in her room looking at the dress. He apologizes for dragging her into this mess, but Agnes shakes her head, saying she's actually happy he gave her this role. She admits she feels guilty for deceiving his kind family, who have welcomed her so warmly despite her lower standing. She worries about the day the lie is exposed and the engagement is cancelled. Bernard, seeing her distress, makes a desperate offer. He asks if she can be his fiancée again, for real this time. Agnes is stunned. He insists that he will pay for the glasses himself, or even the clothes, begging her to bear with the situation a little longer because he wants her to stay. Agnes, moved by his desperation and her own growing feelings, agrees to continue the charade, though she knows she can't keep running forever. Suddenly, the tender moment is interrupted by a frantic knock at the door. Vice-Captain Johann bursts in, his face pale. He addresses Bernard urgently, telling him to stay calm and listen. He delivers a piece of devastating news. The carriage carrying Vice-Commander Orleans's mother was ambushed by armed men. The corridors of the mansion, as a report shatters the peace. The carriage conveying Vice-Captain Orleans' mother has fallen victim to an ambush. Tension spikes immediately as the messenger reveals that shots were fired during the assault. According to the initial report, the carriage was targeted while stationary, and the attackers aimed directly for the noblewomen inside. Bernard, his face drained of color, demands clarity from the messenger, his voice rising in panic as he asks about the condition of the ladies. The messenger stammers, attempting to correct the vice-captain's assumption. He clarifies that the individual who sustained a gunshot wound was not one of the ladies, but the criminal himself. The act of self-defense was executed by Lady Ingrid. Reports indicate that when the assailant burst into the carriage wielding a knife, he was met instantly by a precision shot from a rifle concealed within the vehicle. Bernard processes this reversal of fortune, realizing that aside from the perpetrator, no one, not even the ladies, suffered so much as a scratch. Relief washes over him as he learns they are physically unharmed. He orders his subordinates to proceed to the city guard station immediately, where both women are currently being questioned regarding the incident. Upon his arrival at the guard station, Bernard bursts into the room, apologizing for his earlier outburst. He finds the station commander impressed by the fortitude of his family. The commander admits he had not realized the woman who assisted in the capture was related to Vice-Captain Orleans until now, noting that his relatives appear no less resolute than the man himself. Bernard is reunited with his mother and Ingrid, frantically asking if they are truly unhurt. Ingrid, calm and composed, explains that the event transpired in the blink of an eye. Ingrid recounts the specifics of the ambush. Their carriage had halted in front of a tailor's shop, and she was in the process of collecting luggage to board when a man brandishing a knife forced his way in. She describes the attacker's eyes as bulging and bloodshot, signs that he was not in a rational state of mind. Recognizing that a single second of hesitation would prove fatal, Ingrid reacted with military precision. In that split second, she retrieved a rifle hidden beneath the seat. Bernard listens, stunned by the revelation of his sister-in-law's preparedness. Ingrid continues, describing how she and her mother-in-law coordinated calmly to neutralize the threat. Although she hadn't handled a weapon recently and felt a flicker of worry, her old instincts did not fail her. She assures Bernard that she carefully avoided lethal spots, rendering the criminal unconscious but not dead. Bernard's mother adds that she even administered first aid to the fallen man, noting wryly that raising children keeps one busy and prepared for anything. Bernard advises them to rest while he steps away to speak with the investigators. In the hallway, Bernard confers with the Vice Captain Johann regarding the nature of the attack. Johann suggests that civilians may need to carry weapons for self-defense given the circumstances. However, a darker realization surfaces. The attack seemed targeted not at the women, but at their cargo. Bernard confirms this suspicion, stating that what they were transporting was the Loverge family wedding dress. The investigators deduce that the true objective of the assault was the Golden Princess dress. Given its sale for a high price at the auction, it is natural that others would covet it enough to employ violence. Evidence found on the criminal supports the theory that he was an amateur. A drug was discovered in his pocket, likely used to suppress his fear during the crime. This indicates he was a hired hand rather than a professional assassin. The guard station agrees to hold the dress temporarily as evidence for the investigation. They plan to interrogate the assailant once he regains consciousness to identify his employer. Bernard pledges to do his utmost for the safety of the capital's residents. As the ladies are released from questioning, Bernard offers to escort them home with a carriage from the Royal Knights. Ingrid, however, proposes a change of plans. She expresses a desire to stay at Bernard's house for the time being. Bernard is confused, pointing out that security has been increased around her own manor. Ingrid counters with a strategic argument. If the criminal's true target is the wedding dress, distributing guards across multiple locations is unwise. Ingrid argues that patrols were already present in the city, yet the incident occurred in the heart of the capital regardless. She suggests it would be safer to concentrate their defensive power in one location. Bernard realizes the implication. If the dress, and by extension the legacy of the Golden Princess, is the target, then Agnes is the one most at risk. Agreeing with Ingrid's logic, Bernard consents to them staying, prioritizing family unity and Agnes's safety. Back at the mansion, darkness has fallen. Jigel waits anxiously, noting that the ladies are uncharacteristically late. A sense of heaviness presses on his chest until the door opens. The ladies arrive, apologizing for the delay. Jigel is surprised to see that Bernard has returned with them, having gone to his own home first to retrieve Ingrid's children. The group enters the guest room, where Ingrid's children, Marie and Hector, are waiting. The children greet their mother enthusiastically. Bernard observes Hector, noting the boy is naturally unafraid of strangers and full of energy, having bombarded him with questions during the carriage ride. Agnes introduces herself to the children, smiling warmly. Bernard apologizes to Agnes for the sudden influx of people, concerned she might be overwhelmed. Agnes shakes her head, explaining that she is used to being surrounded by children from her time visiting the orphanage. She smiles, noting that the children give her energy rather than drain it. Bernard gazes at Agnes, his mind racing. He reflects on her life, how she has always been swept along by the circumstances of others, caught in their intentions without the power to resist. Yet, despite this, she never shows fatigue or distress. He finds himself leaning in close, peering at her intently, causing Agnes to flush and point out his proximity. He apologizes, claiming he couldn't see well, a flimsy excuse for his fascination. The atmosphere shifts as the discussion turns to logistics. Johann informs the group that they must explain the details of the attack to Eric and the others later. The reality of the threat looms large. Considering the movements of the culprits, it is possible they could discover Bernard's location at any moment and launch another attack. Agnes's safety is identified as the highest priority. To ensure this, a radical proposal is brought forward. The suggestion is made that, starting tonight, the Lord should share the same bed with Agnes and stay by her side as much as possible to provide constant protection. Bernard freezes, his mind struggling to process the command as the chapter concludes with his shocked reaction. The story begins with the atmosphere within the mansion's corridors hung heavy with suppressed anxiety, the air thick with whispered conspiracies and the rustle of urgent footsteps. While the immediate culprit of the recent incident had been apprehended, the staff remained on high alert, their faces etched with grim determination as they exchanged hushed reports in the dimly lit hallways. The investigation was far from over. The household guard believed an accomplice still lurked in the shadows, waiting for the opportune moment to strike again. The true motive of the attack had been uncovered, revealing a chilling precision. The target was not merely random valuables, but specifically the dress belonging to Lady Agnes's mother. This revelation sent a ripple of unease through the staff, for if the mother's legacy was the target, it stood to reason that Agnes herself might be next in the crosshairs. In a secluded drawing room, a heated debate erupted among the inner circle of the household regarding how to handle the fragile situation involving their mistress. A blonde attendant, his face contorted with concern, argued that withholding the truth was unjust, suggesting that the emergency warranted full disclosure to Agnes immediately. However, the dark-haired master of the house, Bernard, stood firm in his refusal to burden her further. He understood Agnes's psychology better than anyone. He knew that if she learned of the attack, her compassionate heart would instantly shoulder the blame. She would not see herself as a victim but as the cause of their trouble, a burden she would seek to alleviate by fleeing the safety of the house without a single word of farewell. The consensus in the room shifted as the reality of Agnes's self-sacrificing nature settled upon them. Bernard, his expression hardening with resolve, declared that he refused to let Agnes be hurt, not by the attackers and not by the crushing weight of her own guilt. The strategy was decided. They would operate in silence, prioritizing the physical safety of everyone under the roof while keeping the temporary lady in blissful ignorance. The staff was ordered to act as though the worst-case scenario was imminent, maintaining a vigilance that bordered on paranoia. In a moment of flustered levity amidst the tension, the staff turned to Bernard, instructing him to prepare a self-defense weapon immediately, a command that left the stoic knight looking visibly embarrassed as the implication of sleeping arrangements hung in the air. Meanwhile, in the nursery, the innocence of childhood clashed with the encroaching danger. The twins, Hector and Marie, played dangerously close to the large windows, their laughter ringing out in the quiet room. Agnes, her face a mask of gentle concern, intervened quickly, herding them away from the glass and the darkness that pressed against it. When the children questioned why they were being restricted, looking up at her with wide, confused eyes, Agnes invoked the authority of their mother, but her internal thoughts betrayed her true fear of the vulnerability of the night. She reminded them that the forest outside was not a playground but a domain of danger, potentially hiding threats like the big scary bear the children feared. The tension in the room dissipated instantly at the mention of the bear, replaced by a spark of realization in the children's eyes. Hector and Marie exchanged excited glances, their fear transforming into awe as they connected the dots between the terrifying creature of the woods and their protector within the house. They looked toward Bernard, who had entered the room, and declared him the Bear Knight, reasoning that since his name, Bernard, meant strong as a bear, he must be even more powerful than the beast itself. Bernard, usually so composed, found himself disarmed by their innocent logic, a flush of awkwardness rising to his cheeks as Agnes beamed at him, confirming to the children that their uncle would indeed come to save them if anything happened. Bernard, accepting his role as their guardian, vowed to protect them, his promise settling the children's fears and replacing the dread of the night with the comfort of family. Later that evening, as the mansion settled into a quiet hum, Bernard found himself alone in the drawing room, the weight of the past pressing down on him. Though the immediate domestic scene was peaceful, his mind raced through the dark web of connections that led to the current threat. He deduced that the strings were being pulled by a malicious entity from within a prison cell, the brothel owner who held a grudge from the past. The attack on Agnes's mother's dress and the looming threat over his sister-in-law were not random acts of violence but calculated moves in a vendetta orchestrated by a man he had once underestimated. Bernard's gaze hardened as he stared at a letter in his hands, his internal monologue solidifying into a singular vow. He would protect everyone, especially Agnes, from the reach of this vengeance. The household staff, however, was preoccupied with matters of a more romantic nature. Outside the master bedroom, the servants gossiped excitedly about the sleeping arrangements. It had been decided that Agnes and Bernard would share a room for her protection, a scandalous setup that was justified by their engagement. The older matriarch of the house dismissed the propriety concerns, arguing that since they would soon be husband and wife, there was no issue and frankly, she viewed this danger as a serendipitous opportunity to force the awkward couple closer together. She reasoned that Bernard, with his excessive caution and overwhelming respect for Agnes, would never dream of doing anything improper, making the arrangement physically safe, if emotionally charged. Inside the bedroom, the preparations for the night were complete. The maid, Jigel, had hung heavy curtains around the bed, creating a makeshift partition to offer a semblance of privacy and propriety within the shared space. With a cheeky thumbs up and a wish for good luck, she urged Bernard to go to bed quickly, leaving the flustered knight alone with his fiancée. The door clicked shut, leaving Bernard and Agnes in a silence that felt louder than any conversation. The room was tranquil, the only movement coming from Meal, the household cat, who slept soundly in a basket after a long day of playing with the children. Agnes sat on the edge of the bed, her posture stiff, while Bernard stood at a distance, the air between them vibrating with unsaid words and nervous energy. Recognizing Agnes's inability to sleep, Bernard awkwardly broke the silence, offering her a drink to settle her nerves. Agnes accepted with a sudden, eager gratitude, thankful for any distraction from the intimacy of the situation. As they sat together, the clink of glassware punctuating the quiet, Agnes revealed that the drink was delicious, admitting with a shy smile that this was the first time in her life she had ever tasted alcohol. Bernard paused, confused, as he recalled she was 19 when she started working for him, implying she should have been of age. Agnes gently corrected him, noting that her birthday had passed half a month ago, making her officially 20. The revelation struck Bernard with a pang of guilt. Amidst the chaos and his own stoicism, he had completely missed the milestone of the woman he was sworn to protect. Attempting to recover from the awkwardness, Agnes moved to pour him another glass, but without her glasses, her depth perception failed her. She leaned in dangerously close, squinting to see the rim of the glass, her face inches from his as she tried to gauge the distance. The liquid spilled over the edge, cascading onto the table, but Bernard barely noticed the mess. His heart began to hammer in his chest, a deafening drumbeat caused not by the spill, but by her sudden, overwhelming proximity. He felt his composure cracking, the stoic, bare knight, unraveling in the face of her nearness. Desperate to distract himself and diffuse the romantic tension that threatened to consume him, he grasped for a conversation topic, his mind landing clumsily back on the topic of her missed birthday. Bernard, realizing his excuse was transparent, admitted that he was terrible at lying but insisted on offering her a gift. He acknowledged her repeated willingness to act as his fiancée to protect the family and told her to ask for anything she wanted as a token of his gratitude. Agnes, however, paused, her expression softening into a look of profound gentleness. She confessed that no matter how extravagant a gift might be, it paled in comparison to the simple joy of seeing him every day. Bernard, stunned by her lack of material desire, remarked on her selflessness, but Agnes interrupted him, asking permission to look at his face while she spoke. She gazed at him, her eyes clear and unwavering, and delivered a declaration that stripped away all the pretense of their arrangement. She told him that she harbored no desire for things. Her happiness was not rooted in objects or status. From the bottom of her heart, her only wish, the singular desire that drove her, was for him to be happy. She prayed for his happiness above all else, a selfless admission that hung in the air between them, shimmering with honesty. Bernard stared at her, the walls around his heart crumbling under the weight of her sincerity. He noticed the worry that had plagued her features recently and realized that her distress stemmed not from fear for herself, but from seeing the burden he carried. In that quiet bedroom, illuminated by the soft glow of the lamps, Bernard's expression shifted from shock to a tender, sorrowful realization. He looked at Agnes, the woman who asked for nothing yet gave everything, and softly corrected her. She was forgetting something important, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned in, bridging the emotional distance between them, and confessed the truth that mirrored her own. He wanted her to be happy too. It was no longer just about duty, protection, or the tactical maneuvering of a house under siege. It was a mutual plea for the other's joy, a shared vulnerability that bound the bare knight and his lady together far more tightly than any engagement ring ever could. The lingering resonance of Bernard's confession hung heavy in the dimly lit bedroom, the words, "I want you to be happy too," echoing off the walls and settling deep within the silence. The atmosphere, previously charged with a quiet tension, now vibrated with an overwhelming fluster that consumed both the knight and the lady. Bernard, usually the picture of stoic composure, found his face heating up, his eyes widening in shock at his own vulnerability, while Agnes turned a shade of crimson that rivaled the dawn, her coherence failing her completely. Stammers and fragmented syllables tumbled from her lips as she struggled to process the reciprocity of his wish, the simple sentiment shattering her defenses. Desperate to escape the suffocating intimacy of the moment, the two scrambled to retreat into the safety of sleep. They exchanged hurried, awkward pleasantries, their voices pitching higher than usual as they wished each other a good night. Agnes, seizing the excuse of fatigue, agreed emphatically that the day had been long and tiring, her enthusiasm for unconsciousness bordering on the comical. She dove under the covers, seeking refuge from the pounding of her own heart, while Bernard lay in the darkness of his own curtained sanctuary, wrestling with immediate regret. He squeezed his eyes shut, a groan escaping his throat as he replayed the moment in his mind, realizing that the words had slipped past his guard almost unconsciously. He lamented that he hadn't continued, that he had left the declaration hanging in the air without further explanation, leaving the sentiment raw and exposed. The sun rose over the mansion, casting a gentle light through the windows, but the peace of the morning was quickly disrupted by the household's smallest tyrant. Meal, the cat, decided that the time for sleep had ended. He paced across the bed, his meows persistent and demanding, pawing at the lump under the blankets that refused to stir. Agnes, buried deep within the warmth of the bedding, groaned a protest, pleading for just a few more minutes of rest. She questioned the cat's boundless energy, her own body heavy with the exhaustion of the previous day's emotional toll. But meal would not be denied. He prodded and pushed until Agnes's eyes fluttered open, her vision blurry with sleep. As consciousness slowly returned, a horrifying realization dawned on her. The physical landscape of the bed had shifted tectonically during the night. Agnes froze, her eyes snapping wide as she registered her surroundings. She had not merely tossed and turned, she had migrated entirely across the mattress. The partition curtain, installed to maintain propriety, had failed to contain her slumbering form, and she now lay dangerously close to Bernard's side of the bed. Worse, in her unconscious seek for warmth, she had stolen the blanket entirely, wrapping herself in the shared cover while invading his personal space. Panic surged through her as she realized their bodies were touching, the contact sending a jolt of electricity through her waking mind. She recoiled violently, thrashing away from him in a silent scream of embarrassment, questioning how she could have breached the barrier she herself had requested. She turned to Meal for guidance, but the cat simply curled up and went to sleep, offering no counsel for her romantic blunder. Elsewhere in the mansion, Bernard had already risen and returned to the cold logic of his duty. He stood in the study with his aide, Orline, dissecting the events of the attack with clinical precision. Bernard instructed the staff to maintain a facade of normalcy, allowing him to operate in the shadows. The investigation was proving difficult. The participants of the auction where the dress was sold were all nobility, a class notorious for their lack of cooperation with official inquiries. The dress, a government-sponsored auction item, had drawn unusual attention, particularly during the bidding for the piece that belonged to Agnes's mother. Bernard deduced that the culprit was likely a participant in that very auction, someone whose obsession with the item drove them to commit a brazen daylight robbery in the middle of the city. Yet, the motive remained elusive. Bernard pondered what kind of wedding dress could drive a person to such madness. He had seen the original piece kept by the knights and found it beautiful, but not worth a crime. He turned to Orline, asking for his perspective, relying on the aide's intuition to supplement the hard evidence. Orline, caught off guard, stammered for a moment before offering a fantastical theory. Perhaps the dress concealed a secret treasure map drawn in gold and silver ink. Bernard stared at him, unimpressed, and Orline quickly retracted the childish speculation, apologizing for treating the investigation like an adventure novel. Bernard decided that the official channels were too slow. He needed to conduct a private inquiry, targeting specific individuals who had provided information about the mysterious auction. His focus narrowed to one man, Ernest Vanderman. Despite the personal distaste he held for the man, Bernard recognized that Ernest was a key link. He arrived at the office of the Royal Guard Knights, requesting a meeting with Ernest, a move that surprised the staff. Moments later, Ernest burst onto the scene, radiating an energy that Bernard found instantly repulsive. With flushed cheeks and a wide, manic grin, Ernest declared how happy he was that Bernard had come to see him personally, his voice dripping with a suffocatingly passionate energy that made Bernard's skin crawl. Bernard stood stiffly, enduring the man's delight, noting the goosebumps rising on his arms from the sheer intensity of Ernest's unwelcome affection. Ernest apologized for the wait, though Bernard had barely been there a moment, and immediately hijacked the meeting. Ignoring Bernard's request for a quick chat, Ernest insisted they go to a nearby restaurant, claiming he knew a place that served excellent seafood. Bernard, realizing he had little choice if he wanted answers, resigned himself to the excursion, while Orline watched from the sidelines, noting with dry amusement that Ernest seemed genuinely excited. The restaurant was an establishment of quiet elegance, yet Ernest noted that women rarely visited. He ushered Bernard into a private room, a secluded spot that Bernard admitted was perfect for an interrogation. As they settled in, a waiter arrived with the specialty, steamed crab with herb oil. The reason for the restaurant's male-dominated clientele became immediately apparent to Bernard. It was a messy, hands-on affair. Ernest explained that while the crab was delicious, the process of eating it left one dirty from hands to clothes, a culinary chaos that most ladies avoided. Ernest, noticing Bernard's hesitation, asked if the knight knew how to eat the dish. When Bernard admitted his lack of experience with the luxury ingredient, Ernest took it upon himself to demonstrate. Bernard watched, expecting a display of noble refinement, but was greeted instead with savagery. Ernest tore into the crab with his bare hands, eschewing fork and knife, cracking shells and devouring the meat with a wild enthusiasm that left Bernard stunned. Ernest insisted this was the best way to enjoy it, tossing a piece of meat to Bernard and urging him to partake. Bernard took a bite, conceding that the flavor was indeed exceptional, even if the method of consumption was barbaric. As the meal progressed and the wine flowed, Bernard judged the moment right. Ernest was in high spirits, his guard lowered by food and drink. Bernard cut through the culinary chatter, his demeanor shifting instantly from dinner guest to interrogator. He asked plainly if Ernest was the attacker behind the previous day's incident. The accusation hit the table with the weight of a gauntlet. Ernest recoiled, snatching up a napkin to shield himself as if physically attacked, sputtering indignantly at the filthy question. Bernard pressed his advantage, reminding Ernest of his past actions, paying money to try and make Agnes his mistress. He accused Ernest of still harboring designs on her. Ernest, flustered and defensive behind his napkin shield, admitted that he had indeed tried to acquire the wedding dress at the auction and had asked Bernard to look into it. However, he vehemently denied ordering a robbery, insisting that he could never command such a violent act. His expression then shifted, the panic fading into a look of bored indifference. He lowered the napkin, meeting Bernard's gaze with a cold honesty. He declared that the investigation and the dress no longer mattered to him at all. The reason was simple and cutting. He had completely lost interest in Agnes Lieverch. He didn't even remember her face anymore. With a shrug of absolute apathy, Ernest absolved himself of the crime, leaving Bernard to process the anticlimactic truth that the man's obsession had simply evaporated. The tension within the private dining room remained thick, though the source of the pressure had shifted entirely. Ernest Vanderlman, the man Bernard had suspected of orchestrating the violent attack on the carriage, now sat in a state of petulant dismissal. He waved off the accusation with a casual, almost bored demeanor, claiming that his interest in Agnes Lieverch had evaporated completely. In his twisted logic, the absence of desire equated to an absence of motive. Since he no longer coveted her, he reasoned, there was no logical basis for him to attack her. Bernard, however, remained unimpressed by this fickle defense, his gaze hardening as he noted that such a capricious change of heart was hardly a solid alibi. Bernard decided to apply pressure precisely where he knew the armor was weakest. He brought up the official request for an investigation into Lady Agnes that Ernest had submitted to his own unit. The mention of the record struck Ernest like a physical blow. He stammered, his face draining of color as the implications of his paper trail dawned on him. Desperate to salvage his image, Ernest cried out that he was a knight, insisting he could never be the sort of man who stoops to stealing dresses. Bernard, relentless and calm, dismantled this defense by shifting the focus from theft to corruption. He pointed out that utilizing unit members for personal matters was a strict violation of regulations. The reality of his situation crashed down upon Ernest. Bernard drove the point home, declaring him guilty of misconduct and deserving of punishment. He reminded the terrifyingly pale noble that if this abuse of power had leaked to the public, it would have ignited a massive scandal. As a knight of the Royal Guard, Ernest was sworn to set an example, yet he had flagrantly disregarded the rules. Ernest, now sweating profusely, stammered that it was impossible, claiming to have read the regulations thoroughly, yet his trembling voice betrayed his uncertainty. Bernard coldly informed him that he must have missed that specific clause, revealing that the only reason Ernest wasn't currently in a cell was due to the intervention of Captain Lazar. As Ernest spiraled into a panic, burying his face in his hand and lamenting that he had done something truly awful, Bernard's internal assessment of the man began to shift. Over the course of their recent encounters, Bernard had come to understand the pathetic reality of Ernest Vanderlman. He realized that Ernest was not a calculating villain or a mastermind of the criminal underworld. Instead, he was merely the second son of a marquis, raised in a bubble of pampering and privilege, leaving him utterly ignorant of basic propriety or the consequences of his actions. Bernard concluded that while Ernest was undoubtedly a fool, he was not an evil man. Observing the genuine distress and fear radiating from Ernest, Bernard calculated that this man did not fit the profile of the vicious culprit behind the carriage attack. The conversation took a sudden, confessional turn as Ernest, broken by the scolding, began to pour out the contents of his lonely heart. He admitted, with a startling vulnerability, that despite his status and his posturing, he had absolutely no friends. He confessed that he never needed them before, or so he told himself, attempting to mask the pain of his isolation. He revealed a life devoid of camaraderie. He had no relationships with his peers, never visited the gentlemen's clubs, and his social interactions were limited exclusively to women he pursued. His title as the second son of a marquis had acted as a shield, making his life far too easy and insulating him from the struggles that forge character. A flashback pierced the narrative, revealing the root of Ernest's desperate need for validation. In the memory, Ernest's father and older brother discussed him with disdain, unaware or uncaring that he was within earshot. His father dismissed him as a disappointment, questioning what Ernest could possibly achieve if he didn't understand that true power lay in lineage and connections. They mocked his inability to make a single proper friend even after joining the Royal Knights, labeling him a complete failure. This rejection from his own blood fueled his obsession with status and appearance. He believed that everyone hated him, that no matter how hard he tried to speak, no one listened. This deep-seated insecurity drove his pursuit of the dazzling rose, believing that if he could win the heart of a woman who made everyone else burn with jealousy, the world would finally look his way. Returning to the present, Bernard listened as Ernest explained his fascination with him. Ernest saw Bernard, the fifth son of a rural lord with a mansion on the outskirts of town and no prestigious lineage, rising through the ranks solely on merit. Ernest admitted he had been wrong to look down on Bernard. In truth, he had wanted to be his friend. He believed that by learning alongside a man who earned trust through effort rather than privilege, he could someday become a man like him. Tears streamed down Ernest's face as he confessed his admiration, acknowledging that he lacked the inherent strength Bernard possessed from the very start. Bernard, though moved by the confession, did not soften his demeanor immediately. He bluntly told Ernest that he was, seriously, an incredibly annoying person. He listed Ernest's flaws with brutal honesty, treating women like objects, constantly showing off, refusing to listen to others, and acting purely on impulse. He declared Ernest's behavior disgusting. Ernest, sobbing openly now, accepted the criticism, unable to refute the truth of it. However, Bernard offered a path to redemption. He instructed Ernest to repent, specifically for his violations of discipline. He framed punishment not as a simple penalty, but as the proper way to take responsibility for one's actions. Ernest, wiping his tears, agreed to accept his punishment properly and vowed to tell Captain Lazar himself. Then, Bernard extended an olive branch. He told Ernest that once he had been judged and pardoned, he could invite Bernard out for a meal again. The effect on Ernest was instantaneous and explosive. He screamed in joy, clinging to Bernard and promising to treat him to as much food as he wanted. In his manic excitement, Ernest insisted that Bernard bring his girlfriend and family along as well. The mention of family struck a chord with Bernard, who thought of Agnes and the twins waiting for him. He softened, muttering that he would think about it. The chapter concluded with a shift away from the warmth of the restaurant to a colder, more ominous scene. Somewhere in the shadows, an unseen figure declared that they had finally found it, the Liverge family's wedding dress. The heavy wooden door of the restaurant clicked shut behind Bernard, severing the connection to the boisterous, suffocating energy of Ernest Vanderlman. The knight stepped out into the cool night air of the capital, the silence of the cobblestone street offering a welcome reprieve. He adjusted his collar, a heavy sigh escaping his lips as he replayed the absurdity of the last hour. Ernest, a man of noble birth and erratic temperament, had clung to him with the desperation of a drowning man, begging for friendship and promising seafood feasts. "Bring your family," the fool had shouted, his voice cracking with manic joy. Bernard shook his head, a faint, wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth despite his annoyance. The man was an idiot, undoubtedly, a spoiled son who knew nothing of the world. but his malice had evaporated, replaced by a pathetic, almost endearing need for connection. He was no longer a suspect. He was merely a nuisance, albeit one that Bernard found himself strangely tolerating. Bernard's boots clicked rhythmically against the stones as he made his way back to the waiting carriage, his mind shifting gears from the comedic interlude to the grim reality waiting at home. The threat against Agnes remained. Ernest was innocent of the attack, which meant the true culprit was still out there, lurking in the shadows, driven by a motive that remained dangerously opaque. The Golden Princess. The term floated in his mind, a fragment of a rumor he had picked up, a puzzle piece that refused to fit. He climbed into the carriage, his expression darkening. He needed answers, and he needed them before the unseen enemy struck again. The ride back to the mansion was a blur of streetlights and shadows. Upon arrival, the estate stood quiet and imposing against the night sky. Bernard wasted no time. He bypassed the formalities of the entrance hall, his strides long and purposeful as he headed straight for the private quarters. The staff bowed as he passed, but he barely registered their presence. His focus was singular. He needed to see her. He needed to confirm that the sanctuary he had built for her remained unbreached. He reached the door to their shared room and paused, his hand hovering over the handle. Taking a breath to compose his features, he pushed the door open. The room was bathed in the soft, warm glow of the hearth. Agnes sat by the window, her silhouette framed by the heavy curtains. At the sound of the door, she turned, her face lighting up with a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Lord Bernard," she breathed, rising from her chair. The tension that had coiled in her shoulders seemed to dissipate the moment he entered, her trust in him absolute. Bernard crossed the room, the distance between them closing until he stood before her. He reported the outcome of his meeting with Ernest, his voice steady and reassuring. He explained that the investigation into Ernest had yielded a confession of stupidity, not criminality. The man was guilty of being a spoiled noble and abusing his authority for petty reasons, but he was not the mastermind behind the violent assault on the carriage. Agnes listened, her eyes wide and empathetic. When he finished, she didn't express anger or vengeance. Instead, she offered a soft smile, expressing genuine relief that Ernest was not a villain. "I'm glad," she whispered, her compassion shining through. "He isn't a bad person." Bernard watched her, struck once again by the purity of her heart. In a world of schemes and shadows, she remained untainted, a beacon of kindness that he was sworn to protect. But the relief was short-lived. Bernard's expression hardened as he steered the conversation to the unresolved danger. "However," he began, his tone dropping an octave, "this means the real perpetrator is still at large." He watched the realization settle over Agnes, the fear returning to her eyes. He stepped closer, his presence a fortress against the encroaching dread. He brought up the topic of the dress, the mother's wedding dress that had been the specific target of the attack. He mentioned the term that had surfaced in his inquiries, the Golden Princess. At the mention of the name, a flicker of recognition crossed Agnes's face. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands which were clasped tightly in her lap. The room fell silent, the crackling of the fire the only sound as she wrestled with a memory. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She revealed that the Golden Princess was not a person, but a legend, a story her mother had told her years ago, woven into the very fabric of the dress. The scene shifted in her memory, the warm hues of the room replaced by the sepia tones of the past. A young Agnes stood before her mother, a beautiful woman with a gentle smile. The mother held the dress, her fingers tracing the intricate golden embroidery that adorned the bodice. She explained that the pattern was not merely decorative. It was a cipher, a map hidden in plain sight, stitched with threads of gold that caught the light in a specific way. "The Golden Princess protects the treasure," her mother had said, her eyes twinkling with a secret she was passing down to her daughter. The dress was the key to a legacy, a hidden fortune, or perhaps something even more valuable, concealed by the Liverge family generations ago. Back in the present, Bernard absorbed this revelation, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a terrifying clarity. The attack wasn't a random robbery, it was a targeted extraction. The culprit knew about the legend. They knew that the dress contained the map to the Golden Princess's treasure. And if they had failed to secure the dress, or if the dress they stole was a decoy, their sights would inevitably turn to the only living person who might hold the key to deciphering the code, Agnes herself. Bernard's jaw tightened. The danger had evolved from a vague threat to a precise and lethal hunt. He looked at Agnes, who now understood the weight of the target painted on her back. She wasn't just a victim, she was the objective. Fear threatened to overwhelm her, her hands trembling, but Bernard reached out, enveloping her small hands in his own. His grip was firm, grounding her. "I won't let them take you," he vowed, the promise ringing with the steel of a knight's oath. "No matter who they are, no matter what they want, you are safe with me." Meanwhile, across the city, in a room suffocated by shadows and the stench of stale ambition, the antagonist paced. The man, whose face remained obscured by the gloom, threw a heavy object across the room in a fit of rage. It crashed against the wall, shattering. He cursed the incompetence of his hired thugs. The dress they had secured was useless, either a fake or incomplete. He slammed his fist onto a table, his breathing ragged. He knew the legend. He knew the wealth that awaited the one who solved the riddle of the Golden Princess. And he knew that the Liverge girl was the loose end. "Agnes," he hissed, the name dripping with venomous obsession. "You have what is mine." Back in the sanctuary of the bedroom, the mood had shifted from fear to a solemn intimacy. Bernard and Agnes sat close, the physical barrier between them gone. He didn't just offer protection, he offered partnership. He asked her to trust him, not just as a guard, but as a husband. Agnes looked up at him, her fear subsiding, replaced by a fierce determination. She nodded, squeezing his hands back. She would not run. She would not hide. With the bare night by her side, she would face the shadows of her past. The chapter closed on this image of unity, two souls standing firm against the encroaching darkness, the secret of the Golden Princess binding them together in a dangerous game of survival. The silence of the manor's kitchen shattered under the force of a sudden, sharp crack, the sound ricocheting off the stone walls like a gunshot. Alan stood amidst the culinary wreckage, his body coiled tight, a heavy iron frying pan gripped in his hand like a broadsword. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his eyes darting toward the entryway where a shadow had just detached itself from the gloom. He swung the makeshift weapon with desperate ferocity, his voice cracking as he roared a challenge to the intruder, demanding they step forward if they possessed the courage of a man. The adrenaline surged through his veins, transforming the domestic space into a battlefield, his instincts screaming that the enemy had finally breached their sanctuary. The figure in the doorway did not flinch, merely stepping into the light to reveal the familiar, stoic features of his brother. Alan froze, the frying pan wavering in his grip as the reality of the situation crashed into his heightened senses. The intruder was no assassin, but the master of the house himself. Alan lowered his arm, the tension draining from his shoulders in a heavy sigh as he chided his brother for the stealthy approach. He wiped his brow, his heart still hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, and confessed that he believed the mansion had finally been invaded. The fear that had driven his violent reaction lingered in the air, a testament to the suffocating paranoia that had gripped the household. Alan leaned back against the counter, his gaze dropping to the floor as he articulated the source of his dread. He sensed it in the air, a heavy, oppressive weight that signaled the approach of malice. He reasoned that if she, Agnes, were not here, none of this would be happening, yet he quickly pivoted, refusing to blame the innocent. He admitted, his voice dropping to a whisper, that he was terrified. The fear was not for his own skin, but for the vulnerability of his family. The thought of someone under his protection coming to harm paralyzed him, a cold dread that gnawed at his resolve. Suddenly, Alan straightened, his expression hardening into a mask of determination. He declared his resolve to protect Agnes and the house, his voice ringing with a newfound strength. He vowed to stand as a shield between his family and the darkness gathering outside. Yet, the solemnity of the moment evaporated instantly as a thick plume of black smoke billowed from the stove behind him. The sharp, acrid scent of burnt vegetables filled the air. Alan yelped, spinning around to find his soup reduced to a charred ruin, his culinary skills failing where his martial spirit succeeded. Bernard watched the chaotic scene, a silent observation forming in his mind. He noted the purity of Alan's motivation, realizing that for his brother, the definition of family extended to anyone who shared their table, a simple, profound kindness that burned as brightly as the ruined dinner. The narrative shifted to the crisp air of the following morning. Bernard stood at the entrance, prepared for an early departure, when Agnes hurried toward him. She held a wicker basket in her hands, her face flushed with the exertion of the morning and a shy warmth. She presented the basket, explaining that she had prepared sandwiches for his journey, knowing he would be leaving before the household fully stirred. Her eyes sparkled with a gentle concern, her wish for a good morning, carrying the weight of a blessing. Bernard accepted the offering, the mundane act of receiving a packed lunch striking a chord deep within him, resonating with the domestic peace he fought to preserve. Later, in the quiet solitude of a drawing room, Bernard sat across from Jigel, the head maid. The atmosphere was heavy with the gravity of a confession. Bernard leaned forward, his hands clasped, his brow furrowed as he struggled to articulate the turmoil that had taken root in his chest. He announced that he had finally deciphered the true nature of his feelings for Agnes. He described a physical sensation, a painful aching in his chest that felt as though his very heart were being torn asunder whenever he imagined her becoming someone else's wife. He wanted to secure a peaceful life for her, perhaps in a quiet village far from the intrigues of the capital, a life where she could find happiness. Bernard's eyes burned with the intensity of his epiphany. He declared that he finally understood the essence of this overwhelming emotion. He looked at Jigel, his expression deadly serious, and delivered his conclusion. This feeling was identical to the sorrow a father feels when giving his daughter away in marriage. He nodded to himself, satisfied with this deduction, convinced that his protective instinct was born of a paternal, familial bond. Jigel stared at him, her expression an impenetrable mask of disbelief. She sat in silence for a beat, letting his words hang in the air before shattering his delusion with surgical precision. She told him, bluntly and without hesitation, that his belief was a complete misunderstanding. Bernard blinked, confused by her rejection of his theory. Jigel pressed on, challenging him to think critically. She asked if the heart-wrenching pain he described was truly the same affection one felt for a blood relative. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, and posed the ultimate question. Was this possessive, tearing agony something he felt for his family, or was it a precious, singular emotion reserved for only one special person in the entire world? Bernard sat frozen, the gears of his mind grinding to a halt as the walls of his denial began to crumble under the weight of her logic. The fatherly facade dissolved, leaving him exposed to the terrifying, undeniable truth of his own heart. The morning sun filtered through the grand windows of the estate, casting a gentle glow upon Agnes as she beamed with an undeniable radiance. Lord Bernard stood opposite her, stiff and momentarily paralyzed by the sheer brightness of her demeanor. He questioned himself internally, wondering if her luminosity was merely a projection of his own affection, yet the objective reality of her cheerful disposition remained undeniable. Agnes, sensing the lingering silence, tilted her head with innocent concern, but Bernard, unable to sustain direct eye contact, abruptly dismissed the moment as his own imagination. The weight of his own realization pressed upon him. The question of whether he loved Agnes surfaced in his mind with terrifying clarity. Sensing his withdrawal, Agnes leaned in, her eyes wide with worry as she sought to capture his gaze. She stammered, fearing she had committed some offense against him. Bernard, however, recoiled from the vulnerability of the moment. He denied any wrongdoing on her part with a sharp, evasive retort, turning his back to her. He announced his departure for the day with a rigid formality, instructing her to take care of herself without once looking back. As he strode away, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, Agnes was left trembling slightly, clutching her hands to her chest. She rationalized his coldness not as malice, but as a clumsy inability to express his true emotions, recognizing the emotionally stunted man beneath the stoic exterior. Bernard emerged from the estate, the imposing silhouette of the castle and the sprawling capital city looming in the background. His hand covered his face, fingers digging into his skin as he grappled with the intensity of the interaction he had just fled. His subordinates greeted him with disciplined salutes, but Bernard was lost in a haze of embarrassment and repressed longing. A voice cut through his internal turmoil. Julian, his blonde-haired aide, approached with a knowing smirk, immediately deducing the source of his commander's distress. Julian teased him mercilessly, accusing Bernard of ignoring him all day because he was too busy dwelling on his sweetheart. Bernard snapped back, demanding Julian cease his nonsense, but the flush on his face betrayed him. Julian, leaning back against a tree with casual insouciance, noted that Bernard's denial was unconvincing. The conversation shifted abruptly from romantic teasing to the grim reality of their nightly duties. Julian reported on the investigation regarding a man named Don Quixote. Despite scouring the oldest archives and records, no such individual existed, leading them to conclude the name was an alias. The investigation had hit a dead end, necessitating a new strategy. Bernard listened, his expression hardening as the subject turned to the darker underbelly of their order. Julian recounted the unsettling discoveries he had made while reviewing personnel histories. Mysterious demotions of distinguished knights, inexplicable promotions for those without merit, and the formation of suspicious cliques within the higher ranks. The corruption ran deep. Julian described an environment rife with bullying so severe it forced good knights to resign, a system where money dictated influence, and honor was a commodity to be bought and sold. Bernard absorbed this information, his jaw set in a grim line. The reality of the knightly order was far dirtier than he had anticipated. Julian suggested that these traces of corruption were not new but had festered long before their arrival. The men in their unit were rough, but even they struggled to accept the extent of the rot. Bernard, however, connected these findings to a more personal threat. He surmised that the irregularities were not random. The carriage attack incidents and the theft of the dress all seemed to orbit around Agnes. A pattern emerged, suggesting they had overlooked a crucial link connecting the corruption to the danger facing his wife. With a steely resolve, Bernard turned to Julian, issuing a specific command to investigate one final lead, determined to close the net around the threat. Meanwhile, within the safety of the estate's drawing room, a different kind of battle reached its conclusion. A chess piece clattered onto the board, sealing the game. Agnes declared checkmate with a gentle smile, her hand lingering over the board. The room erupted into a mix of shock and celebration. Ingrid, Bernard's formidable relative, sat frozen, unable to comprehend her defeat. Miel and the other household members cheered, praising Agnes's unexpected skill. Ingrid, cheeks flushed with frustration and excitement, lamented losing again, though Agnes humbly attributed the victory to mere coincidence. The atmosphere was light, a stark contrast to the dark political maneuvering Bernard faced outside. It was revealed that sister and niece had also dominated the matches, turning the sophisticated game into a delightful rout of the usual victors. Bernard arrived at the doorway, observing the scene silently. He watched as Ingrid, recovering her competitive spirit, demanded one more round, refusing to end the day on a loss. Agnes accepted the challenge gracefully. The sight of the women enjoying themselves, laughing and engaging in intellectual combat, brought a softness to Bernard's expression. He noted how long it had been since he had witnessed someone skilled enough to challenge Ingrid. Yet, as he watched Agnes's focused expression, the invisible wall he had built around himself began to crumble further. Ingrid noticed his presence and playfully declared it was his turn next, but the hour had grown late. Miel rubbed his eyes, succumbing to sleepiness, and the group decided to adjourn for the night. As the household dispersed, Agnes turned to see Bernard fully entering the room. She welcomed him home with a warmth that seemed to melt the lingering tension of the day. Bernard, caught off guard by the domestic tranquility, felt the heat rise in his cheeks again. He murmured a response, still struggling to navigate the intimacy of their arrangement. Ingrid, observant as ever, paused to comment on Agnes's victory before retiring, noting her surprise that Agnes could defeat her brother's wife. Bernard, attempting to normalize the conversation, asked Agnes if she was particularly skilled at chess. Agnes denied any special talent, explaining that she simply used to play often with her parents. She recalled fond memories of her father playing with his friends, and how she and her mother would talk for hours over the chessboard before her mother passed away. The mention of her past cast a momentary melancholic shadow, but Agnes quickly brightened, remembering another task. She presented a basket of cookies she had baked with the family that day, offering them to Bernard as a token of comfort. Bernard accepted the gesture, but his eyes remained averted. The physical distance between them closed, yet the emotional chasm bridged by his anxiety remained. Agnes, emboldened by the day's events and the late hour, stepped closer. She confronted him gently but firmly, pointing out that he had not looked her in the eye even once since returning. She expressed how his evasion saddened her, her voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and longing. The scene shifted to the intimacy of a private chamber. The air grew heavy with unspoken desire. Agnes had inadvertently fallen asleep on a chaise, wearing her nightclothes, waiting for him. Bernard leaned over her, his composure fracturing. He questioned her carelessness, his voice a low rumble. He chided her for letting her guard down, for sleeping so vulnerably in front of a man who was not yet truly her husband in every sense. He confessed that his mind fell into chaos because of her. The proximity was overwhelming. He braced his hands on either side of her, trapping her within his space. Bernard's internal restraint snapped. He stared down at her, his eyes burning with an intensity he could no longer mask. He asked her what she wanted him to do, flipping the question to ask what she intended to do with him. He issued a warning, his voice thick with suppressed emotion. He told her to avert her eyes, to turn away, to raise her voice in protest, to push his hand away. He gave her every opportunity to escape the escalating situation, stating that right now, he could still swallow down his true feelings and retreat. He claimed he was not afraid, but his trembling frame suggested a terrifying battle between honor and love. Agnes, however, did not flinch. She lay beneath him, her eyes locking onto his with unwavering resolve. She refused to look away. She asked herself if she could allow a bit of pride, having already resolved to forgive everything because the man before her was Bernard. Instead of pushing him away, she reached up, her hand gently cupping his cheek. She bridged the final distance, her voice barely a whisper as she asked the question that had haunted them both. She asked if he loved her. Bernard's resistance was shattered completely. The barriers of duty, fear, and awkwardness disintegrated under her touch. He leaned in, his face inches from hers, the tension resolving into a profound intimacy. He confirmed her hope, answering with a solemnity that carried the weight of years. He admitted that yes, he loved her, and that he had loved her since long ago. The confession hung in the air, sealing their bond as the chapter closed on their embrace. A somber introspection, set against the backdrop of a modest estate nestled in the quiet outskirts of the capital. Bernard's internal voice permeates the scene, heavy with the weight of inherited inadequacy. He reflects on the precarious nature of his social standing, noting that his position within the aristocracy was extremely weak. As the fifth son of a provincial noble family, destiny had afforded him little in the way of birthright or legacy. The grand inheritances and titles were reserved for his elder brothers, leaving him with nothing but a small, isolated mansion on the fringes of society and a knight's salary that barely covered the necessities of his station. In the solitude of the night, standing before the darkened silhouette of his home, he questioned his own worthiness, harboring a deep-seated belief that no one would ever voluntarily choose a man with so little to offer. The scene shifts to the intimacy of a sun-drenched bedroom, where the morning light filters through sheer curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Bernard hovers over Agnes, who lies amidst the disheveled sheets, her eyes fluttering open. The stark contrast between his previous self-loathing and the current reality strikes him with force. He admits to himself that he used to believe he was unlovable until she entered his life. He gazes down at her, his expression softening as he processes a revelation that shatters his previous assumptions. Agnes calls out his name softly, her voice thick with sleep and affection. Bernard recoils slightly, his face flushing with a sudden, intense realization. He stammers internally, his mind racing as he connects the dots of their shared history. He realizes with a jolt that Agnes did not just begin to love him recently, her affection had been present long before he ever acknowledged it. He questions the timeline of her love, frantically asking himself when exactly her feelings began. A memory surfaces, a fragment of the past depicting a hooded figure standing before him, a moment from even earlier than he had initially calculated. The realization that she had harbored these feelings through all their past interactions leaves him reeling, sweat beading on his forehead as he grapples with the depth of her devotion. Agnes, fully awake now, looks up at him with wide, questioning eyes, sensing the turmoil radiating from him. She stammers his name, confused by the sudden intensity of his gaze. Bernard, however, reaches a breaking point. He decides that the purity of her affection demands nothing less than absolute truth in return. He grips the fabric of his shirt, his knuckles white, and confesses that while her feelings bring him immense happiness, that very happiness compels him to be honest. He steels himself, his eyes locking onto hers, and reveals the dark origin of their union. Initially, he hired her not out of kindness, but out of revenge. Agnes stares at him, her expression one of bewildered silence. Bernard continues his confession, the words tumbling out as he purges his guilt. He explains that 5 years ago, at a high society party, he had observed her and convinced himself that she looked down on him. He believed that she, like so many others born into wealth and status, must despise those who possess nothing. He clung to this bitter belief, constructing a fortress of resentment around his heart. Agnes, hearing this, immediately assumes the blame, asking frantically if she had caused him trouble or offended him in some way during that past encounter. Bernard cuts her off, shaking his head vehemently. He refuses to let her shoulder the burden of his own prejudices. He admits that the fault lay entirely with him. He had judged her without ever trying to understand who she truly was. He lowers his head, his hair falling over his eyes to hide the shame etched into his features. He confesses that he hated the judgment of high society more than anything, yet he had committed the very sin he despised by judging her by those exact standards. He declares brokenly that he is not the noble man she believes him to be and offers a profound apology for his past motives. Agnes listens to his self-flagellation with a gentle, unwavering gaze. She rejects his self-condemnation. She tells him that even if his initial motives were clouded by revenge, the reality of their time together cannot be erased. She insists that the memories they shared in this house were not lies. In this mansion, which Bernard deemed small and insignificant, Agnes found a warmth she had never known. She describes discovering a kindness in him that transcended his initial intentions. She recalls how he always thought of her, watched over her, and treated her with a blunt honesty that she cherished. Tears of happiness prick at the corners of her eyes as she beams up at him, her hands clasped against her chest. She declares that since coming to this house, she has grown to love him even more than before. She found in him someone who saw her for who she truly was, stripping away the artificial layers of rank and wealth to value her essence. She confesses that she loves everything about him because he is the one person who loves her just as she is. Bernard, stunned by her unconditional acceptance, can only stammer her name, overwhelmed by the grace she extends to him. He whispers a quiet thank you, the tension in his shoulders finally releasing. The emotional crescendo settles into a tender quiet. Agnes shifts the mood, reaching for a small, velvet-lined box. She presents it to Bernard, stating that there is something precious she wishes him to have. Bernard opens the box to reveal an ornate necklace featuring a large, oval stone set in intricate metalwork. He recognizes the significance immediately, asking if it is a keepsake from her mother. Agnes confirms this, explaining that the necklace was part of her mother's wedding trousseau and has served as her protective charm ever since she received it. She carried it with her everywhere, clutching it as a tangible link to her past. Agnes delves into the history of the object, recounting how her mother always worried about the uncertainty of the future. Her mother had given her the necklace with specific instructions, to use it if she ever faced truly hard times. Agnes admits that after losing her home and falling into poverty, she had planned to pawn the necklace at a shop to survive. However, when it came time to express her gratitude to Bernard, she hesitated. She did not want to thank him using money gained from selling an inheritance. She wanted to use money she had earned through her own effort. She explains that she feared if she let the opportunity slip, she might never get the chance to properly thank him again. A flashback sequence illustrates the depth of her struggle. A young, hooded Agnes stands in the street, looking ragged and desperate. She recalls identifying herself as Agnes Liverge to the authorities, but her appearance was so diminished that they accused her of impersonating a noble. The rejection was absolute. She was expelled from the city guard's knight's quarters, cast out alone. Despite this humiliation, she spent her meager savings to buy a proper gift for Bernard, eventually running out of money completely. It was this stubborn pride and desire to give a self-made gift that prevented her from selling the necklace. Bernard listens to this harrowing tale, realizing the extent of her suffering. He comments on how no one would have guessed the former lady of a noble house would be reduced to such a state. Agnes, however, smiles through the memory. She asserts that thanks to those hardships, especially after her eyesight worsened, she became the person she is today. She admits that for a long time she felt hopeless, but now, looking at Bernard, she feels incredibly lucky and happy. Bernard attempts to reject the gift, overwhelmed by its value and the history attached to it. He stammers that he cannot accept something so precious. Agnes interrupts his refusal with firm resolve. She tells him that he has protected her until now, and now she wishes to give him this necklace so that it is her turn to protect him. She insists he wear it himself, claiming that seeing him wear it makes her feel strong and calm. Bernard relents, lifting the chain over his head. As the jewel settles against his chest, he examines the stone closely. He notes that it is a beautiful blue gem, but his sharp eyes catch something peculiar. Fine lines run through the stone like many tiny cracks, forming an intricate, deliberate web. He studies the pattern intensely, his brow furrowing as recognition dawns. He asks aloud what the pattern is, realizing it resembles a map of the area surrounding the royal capital. The realization shifts the atmosphere from romantic to conspiratorial. Bernard questions how cracks could naturally form such a specific pattern. He suspects the gem conceals a hidden message or location. He asks Agnes if her mother ever told her anything specific about it. Agnes repeats her mother's cryptic instruction, "Use it when the time comes." Bernard pieces the clues together, deducing that the use might not mean selling it, but utilizing the information it holds. The map seems to point to the forest near their current house, marking a specific location. Bernard's expression darkens with concern as he connects the necklace to Agnes's lineage. He recalls that Agnes's mother was known by the illustrious title, the Golden Princess. The existence of a hidden map inside a keepsake from such a prominent figure implies a secret of dangerous magnitude. He turns to Agnes with grave seriousness, asking if she has told anyone else about the necklace. Agnes confirms she has told not a soul. Bernard commands her to keep it that way, demanding that from this moment on, she must never speak of it to anyone. Agnes agrees immediately, her face mirroring his seriousness. They swear a solemn oath to keep the secret forever. Agnes promises, "I swear it," sealing the pact between them. The narrative concludes with a jarring shift in perspective, moving from the warmth of the bedroom to a cold, foreboding flash-forward. A figure with light hair, presumably Julian, is seen scouring the shelves of a library, searching desperately for answers. A narrative voice, likely Bernard's future self reflecting on this moment, expresses deep regret over the promise made that day. The narrator laments that they should have revealed the secret immediately. The internal monologue reveals a devastating consequence. Because they kept the secret, they failed to catch the culprit. The narrator admits that at the time, they thought everything would be fine, failing to realize that by hiding the truth, the one who was truly trapped was not the enemy, but the narrator himself. The chapter ends on this note of ominous foreshadowing, transforming the romantic resolution into the prelude of a tragedy. The grand foyer of the estate, where Lord Bernard stood ready to depart for his duties. He addressed the head maid, a composed woman with graying hair, offering a solemn apology for leaving the household management in her care. Though his instincts as a protector urged him to remain and stand guard over his home personally, his obligations to the knightly order demanded his presence elsewhere. The maid, adjusting her apron, reassured him with a stoic professionalism, confirming that preparations were complete and urging him not to worry. Bernard adjusted his coat, his mind already racing toward the grim tasks ahead. He resolved that the current situation required a direct approach. He needed to meet a certain individual face-to-face to uncover the truth. The corruption ran deep, and his suspicions had curdled into certainty. He no longer trusted the order itself, suspecting its very members were complicit in the shadows surrounding Agnes. Consequently, he had bypassed standard channels, entrusting his aide, Julian, with a covert investigation into the case related to his wife. As he prepared to step out, Bernard's hand brushed against the hidden pocket containing the jewel Agnes had given him. The name, Jigel, echoed in his mind, a heavy reminder of the artifact's significance. He steeled himself, internalizing the weight of his station. Just as a lord had duties he must execute, this was a time when every individual in his orbit had a specific role to play. He silently vowed to handle the matters concerning Agnes personally, refusing to delegate her safety to chance. A fleeting moment of warmth broke his steely demeanor. He reflected on the revelation of the previous night, that his feelings for Agnes were returned in full measure. Yet, a pragmatic voice within checked his rising joy. She was not his wife in the truest sense just yet, and danger still lurked. He turned to bid farewell, and Agnes was there, beaming with a radiance that nearly disarmed him. She wished him a good morning, asking if he was already leaving. The sheer cuteness of her expression struck him with the force of a physical blow, causing him to cover his mouth to hide his reaction. The domestic tranquility was interrupted by a small voice. Marie, his niece, peered out from behind Agnes, addressing him as Uncle Bernard. The young girl, eyes wide and seeking validation, asked if she was brave. Bernard, softening instantly, affirmed her courage without hesitation. Emboldened by his praise, Marie asked a question that had clearly been weighing on her. She wanted to play outside. A shadow of concern crossed Agnes's face. She gently warned Marie about the scary animals in the forest, attempting to dissuade her. However, Bernard observed the scene with a sharp eye. He realized that Marie was at an age where the desire to explore was a natural force, yet she had been suppressing her own childhood desires due to their circumstances. Marie, sensing an opening, proposed a compromise. If she went with her strong uncle, surely she would be safe. Bernard agreed immediately, his consent eliciting a gasp of pure delight from the child. Agnes, caught up in the infectious joy of the moment, accidentally raised her voice in excitement. Flustered, she apologized, explaining that the idea sounded so fun she couldn't help herself. She then proposed a plan. They should all go on a picnic the following day. Bernard looked at the two women, one small, one grown, both having spent too long holding back their own happiness. He noted the weather had been lovely and realized he had the next day off. With a gentle nod, he agreed to the plan, solidifying the promise of a peaceful respite. The conversation shifted to the menu for their excursion. Agnes, eager to please, boasted of her improved culinary skills, attributing her success to an excellent teacher. In the background, a kitchen maid pumped her fist, silently claiming credit for Agnes's progress. Agnes asked Bernard what kind of sweets he preferred, listing options like cookies, cake, and apple pie. Bernard hesitated, a flush creeping up his neck. He averted his gaze, mumbling his preference almost inaudibly, chocolate cake. Agnes leaned in, her eyes sparkling, and confirmed the order, specifically the kind with plenty of chocolate. Outside the room, the household staff struggled to contain their reactions. Alan and the maid pressed against the door, overhearing the exchange. The maid clutched her face, overwhelmed by the frustration of knowing her stoic lord had a secret sweet tooth and seeing how perfectly the couple suited each other. Alan, ever the professional, ushered the staff back to their duties, reminding them they had work to finish. As the servants retreated down the corridor, the atmosphere shifted subtly from domestic comedy to underlying tension. Alan adjusted his jacket, and the narrative focus zoomed in on a concealed object, a knife he carried for self-defense. His companion, looking grim, expressed a fervent hope that they would never have to use it. They exchanged a solemn nod, wishing for a peace that seemed increasingly fragile. The scene cut abruptly to the headquarters of the Knightly Order. Bernard strode through the halls, his brow furrowed. He noted immediately that Julian was absent, an irregularity that set off alarm bells in his mind. He called out for Vice Captain Orlean, sensing something was wrong. He found the vice captain in a state of high agitation. Orlean broke the devastating news. Julian had been found unconscious in the archive room by the night watchman. He had taken a severe blow to the back of the head. His condition was critical, and he was not expected to recover anytime soon. Bernard's face darkened with a terrible realization. He demanded to know if Julian had been carrying anything when he was found, his mind racing to the evidence Julian had been gathering. The attack in the archive room confirmed his worst fears. The enemy was within the walls. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the office burst open. Ingrid, Bernard's sister-in-law, rushed in, her usual composure shattered. She was breathless, her face pale with terror. She gasped out an apology, repeating Bernard's name as if it were a lifeline. Bernard turned, shocked to see her there, and urged her to calm down and explain. Ingrid gripped her dress, her knuckles white. She delivered the message that brought Bernard's world crashing down. There was someone who wished to see him, she stammered, before forcing out the catastrophic truth. Miss Agnes has been kidnapped. The final panel dissolved into a void of despair. A disembodied narration, perhaps Bernard's own internal voice, mused on the cruelty of fate. It observed that to possess everything in life was an exceedingly difficult task. The chapter closed with Bernard standing frozen, the name of his beloved escaping his lips as a desperate whisper into the encroaching darkness. A grim scene labeled as an inescapable tragedy, centering on the moment Marie falls into the clutches of hostile forces. The sequence of events unravels through a retrospective analysis. Earlier, while Agnes and the others occupied themselves with the innocent task of making sweets, a disturbance occurred outside. Miel, startled by a sudden sound, ventured outdoors, prompting Lady Marie, consumed by worry, to follow closely behind. This act of concern led her directly into an ambush, resulting in her capture by enemies lying in wait. The kidnappers confront the household staff with a chilling ultimatum. If they value Marie's life, they must surrender Agnes Liverge, who stands amidst the chaos disguised in a maid outfit she donned to assist with the baking. The household staff, refusing to capitulate to such vile demands, launch a desperate counterattack. A large man wielding a shovel and a woman brandishing a frying pan charge the cloaked intruders with fierce determination, demanding Marie's immediate release. The assailants, however, possess superior combat training. One easily blocks the shovel strike with a dagger while the other evades the frying pan, dismissing the servants' efforts as foolish and pointless behavior. To quell the resistance, the kidnappers escalate their threats, warning that they cannot guarantee Marie's safety if the staff continues to struggle, stating they simply wish for Agnes to accompany them but will use lethal force if forced. The resistance crumbles under the weight of the threat, leaving the servants devastated and weeping on the ground as the reality of their helplessness sets in. Amidst the despair, Agnes steps forward, her internal resolve hardening as she questions how long she intends to remain protected while others suffer for her sake. She confronts the kidnappers, threatening to harm herself if they do not release the hostages, a move that baffles the criminals who view such threats from a noble girl as ridiculous. Agnes commands them to move away from her newfound family, driven by the memory of how the household took her in when she had lost everything, treating her with genuine kindness and offering her a place to belong. She determines that it is now her turn to protect them. The kidnappers, realizing Agnes is the only leverage they have left after failing to extract information from the former chancellor, agree to the exchange but handle her roughly, prompting cries of protest from the family. The criminals inadvertently reveal that their motive involves information they failed to obtain from His Excellency, a slip of the tongue that seals Agnes's fate as a loose end. Realizing the girl has heard too much, the leader decides they have no choice but to silence her, signaling a shift from abduction to potential elimination. Just as the situation turns lethal, Eric bursts onto the scene, shouting for everyone to get down. Riding a horse with reckless abandon, he executes a dynamic rescue attempt, threatening to trample the kidnappers if they do not release Agnes immediately. He strikes one of the cloaked figures with the horse's momentum, creating a brief window of chaos. However, the kidnappers prioritize their mission, admitting they got carried away. They reaffirm that securing Agnes is their sole objective. Utilizing the confusion, they retreat into the forest with Agnes in tow, successfully evading Eric's pursuit. The rescue attempt fails, leaving Agnes in enemy hands and Eric overwhelmed with apology and frustration. In the aftermath, a heavy atmosphere of regret hangs over the estate. Eric berates himself, believing that if he had been more vigilant regarding Marie's movements, the tragedy would have been averted. His sister-in-law intervenes, absolving him of fault and steering his attention to a critical detail she observed during the confrontation. She asks if he noticed how the criminal held his knife, specifically pointing out that the blade faced downward. This specific grip triggers a realization in Eric. It is a technique drilled exclusively into the Knights of the Guard. Eric deduces that the perpetrator must be an insider from the Knight Corps, possessing the specific skills to infiltrate, steal a dress, assault a friend, and coordinate a squad of knights for a kidnapping. Furthermore, only someone with such access could check records linking Eric's name to Agnes, confirming the abduction was a targeted, internal conspiracy. Overcome with self-loathing, Eric concludes that Agnes was taken because of his own uselessness, spiraling into guilt. Regaining his composure, Eric informs his sister-in-law that he must depart immediately for a specific destination, instructing her to return to safety while he handles the situation. He vows not to act recklessly or alone, revealing his plan to call upon a friend for assistance. As they travel in a carriage, the tension softens slightly. Eric remarks that crying has ruined her face, a clumsy attempt to comfort her which she brushes off. In a moment of vulnerability, Eric confesses that he feels pathetic and admits that protecting his family amidst such chaos felt like a risk he wasn't ready for. He reveals a complex truth. Agnes's presence sometimes annoyed him, yet he feels immense guilt because she sacrificed herself for them without ever knowing his internal weakness. His sister-in-law validates his feelings, noting that hatred and love can coexist, and reassures him that his horse-handling skills were impressive, urging him not to feel ashamed for needing time to accept Agnes into his heart. The scene shifts to the exterior of the grandiose Ernesta family estate, where Eric arrives to seek aid. A servant announces a merchant wishing to see him, presenting a guide to entering noble society as a cover. The visitor uses a bizarre code phrase about wanting to eat crab again to signal his identity while maintaining a disguise, pushing past Eric's initial confusion to insist on a meeting under the guise of a sales pitch. Once inside the safety of a private room, the merchant drops the act, revealing himself to be a young male ally who entered in disguise to avoid questions. Eric punches him out of frustration or perhaps relief, stating that this friend is the only one he can rely on. The ally identifies the core of the problem. Agnes's father, Gerard de Liverge, is imprisoned in a noble exclusive facility for embezzlement. He theorizes that the kidnappers targeted Agnes because they failed to extract information from Gerard directly, making a meeting with the father the most logical step to uncovering the enemy's identity. However, accessing the prison is notoriously difficult, requiring a month-long process even for family members. The ally, realizing the urgency and leveraging the high status of the Ernesta family, agrees to arrange the meeting, promising to pull strings to bypass the bureaucracy. He notes Eric's desperation and decides to trust him without asking for details, a testament to their friendship. Eric expresses profound gratitude, and as he looks out the window, he renews his vow to save Agnes no matter the cost, begging her to wait for him a little longer. The narrative establishes a deductive chain, positing that the culprit possesses an unusual attachment to both Agnes and her biological family. Furthermore, the evidence points toward an insider within the Royal Guard Knights. To unravel the identity of this traitor, the investigators conclude that the critical key lies with the one man who knows the family's secrets best, Agnes's imprisoned father. Inside a moving carriage, the atmosphere is thick with tension. Eric sits opposite Lord Ernest, his hands clasped tightly in prayer or suppressed rage. Lord Ernest observes his companion, noting that this is the first time he has ever witnessed such a raw, desperate expression on Eric's face. Eric breaks the silence with a singular, driving vow. He will save Agnes, no matter the cost. Lord Ernest, sensing the gravity of the situation, decides against probing for details. He acknowledges that Eric must have a compelling reason for his inability to retreat from this dangerous path. Eric apologizes, realizing he solicited Ernest's aid without offering a full explanation, but Ernest waves off the apology. He expresses a quiet satisfaction that Eric chose to rely on him. In a moment of frantic energy, Ernest produces a thick, ornate book titled, Ernest Family Notes, Aristocracy Confidential. Tears stream down Ernest's face as he presents the volume. He explains that his family, obsessed with molding him into a perfect noble, had previously withheld this book, deeming him unqualified. Possessing it now signifies his acceptance and maturity, a personal victory he cherishes amidst the chaos. Seizing the opportunity, Eric issues a specific directive. He instructs Ernest to scour the confidential records for a specific name, Don Quixote. Eric theorizes that if this name connects to a major noble lineage, it will lead them to the mastermind. He adds another layer to the investigation, asking Ernest to identify the mysterious figure who bid against them at the auction for Agnes's mother's dress, suspecting a link between the bidder and the kidnapper. The carriage halts before a formidable stone structure, the prison. The building looms ominously, situated directly adjacent to the Royal Guard headquarters. This proximity complicates the mission, as every knight in the vicinity is now a potential suspect. Eric outlines the constraints. Visitation is strictly limited to 15 minutes, and the identity of the enemy remains unknown. To infiltrate without raising alarms, Eric adopts the disguise of a servant, pulling a hood low over his face. He instructs Ernest to remain in the carriage and cross-reference the names in the book while he ventures inside. Eric navigates the prison's stone corridors, eventually arriving at a cell occupied by a man of fallen grandeur, Gerard de Liverge. The former chancellor, now imprisoned for embezzlement, sits in a chair, surrounded by remnants of a refined life, including a chessboard and books. Gerard detects the visitor immediately, remarking cynically that only villains visit him in this place. He questions if Eric is one of them. Eric observes Gerard closely, reminding himself not to underestimate this man who once held the king's ear. Gerard scrutinizes the hooded figure standing beyond the bars. He questions what business a trembling young man could have with a wretched prisoner. When Eric attempts to speak, Gerard cuts him off, displaying a sharp, deductive intellect. He surmises that Eric has come to hear the secret story regarding his late wife, the woman once known as the Golden Princess. Gerard launches into a bitter monologue, denying the existence of the rumored hidden treasure or gold ingots that many believe he stashed away. He recounts his total ruin, the death of his wife, the loss of his fortune, the stripping of his title, and his subsequent imprisonment. He challenges the old adage that marrying the Golden Princess brings eternal happiness, asking Eric if he looks like a happy man. Eric responds with blunt, cutting honesty, "You look like the most miserable man in the world." The insult triggers a surprising reaction. Gerard bursts into maniacal laughter, amused by the visitor's audacity. He declares that he has no interest in cowards who hide their faces and demands Eric remove his hood. As Eric reveals his face, Gerard analyzes him with piercing accuracy. He deduces Eric's background instantly, a knight from a Viscount family in the southwest, identifying him by the alias Bernard. He reconstructs a false narrative for Eric, suggesting he is a widower seeking the gold to fund political ambitions. Eric plays along with the Bernard persona, confirming the fabrication to keep the conversation moving. However, he subtly steers the interrogation back to the core mystery. He asks Gerard to identify who, among all the treasure hunters and opportunists, showed the most interest in the non-existent fortune. Eric conveys a desperate urgency, internally pleading for Gerard's cooperation as he has no other options. Gerard falls silent, assessing the young man's character. After a long sigh, he concedes that Eric appears to be a good young man. Gerard claims confidence in his ability to judge people, a skill honed over a lifetime of dealing with warriors and politicians. He agrees to reveal the information, but imposes a strict condition. Gerard speaks of his daughter Agnes with a sudden tenderness. He describes her as beautiful, kind-hearted, and far too gentle for this world. He reveals that she visited him during the early days of his imprisonment, despite his unworthiness as a father. His condition is simple yet heavy. Eric must find Agnes and protect her. Then, Gerard's eyes sharpen. He realizes that Eric's desperation stems from a personal connection. He asks if Eric knows his daughter. To verify Eric's claim and ensure he is not just another treasure hunter, Gerard tests him with an intimate detail. He asks if Eric knows about the mole on Agnes's chest. A flashback image confirms Eric's knowledge of this detail, a specific mole located on her upper chest, likely observed during a medical or intimate moment in the past. Eric's reaction confirms the truth without words. Gerard interprets the silence as confirmation. The realization hits Gerard: Agnes has been kidnapped. Having verified Eric's loyalty and intent, Gerard provides the name Eric sought. He identifies Don Quixote, but clarifies the true identity behind the suspicion. The man most likely responsible, the one obsessed with the fortune and the family, is Johann Blondel. The final visualization reveals Johann Blondel, a man with a mustache and a cold, calculating gaze, depicted in a military-style uniform, solidifying him as the antagonist lurking within the royal guard. The investigation narrows its focus to a single, powerful figure, Johann Blondel. As a marquis holding significant authority and widely popular among the kingdom's knights, he stands as the prime suspect, with rumors already positioning him as the next commander. However, the protagonist realizes that confronting him means facing a legion of allies, as Blondel's influence permeates the entire knightly order. Inside the carriage, Ernest breaks the heavy silence, observing that his companion seems lost in thought and remarking that he looks surprisingly like his father, the head of the Vanderlmen family. Eric recoils internally at the comparison, noting that he has never been told he resembles the man he holds in such low regard. He reflects on the warnings he received about digging too deep, realizing that leaving the previous enemy alive was a calculated move by the mastermind to send a message. He questions why the enemy spared Julian despite him being an obstacle, deducing that the true enemy sits at the very top of the knightly hierarchy. Determined to shield his friend from the coming storm, Eric attempts to sever ties, telling Ernest that his help has been sufficient and bidding him goodbye. He confesses that he is conducting a dangerous internal investigation and refuses to drag anyone else down with him. Ernest, however, staunchly refuses to abandon him, declaring that since he boarded the ship, he will see the journey through to the end. He insists on staying, pointing out that he is the only one who has ever scolded and warned Eric, creating a bond of mutual trust. Accepting this loyalty, Eric entrusts Ernest with a critical mission: to deliver a specific item to his family and instruct them to flee immediately. He hands over a dagger, instructing Ernest to present it to his mother in a way that conceals the eagle wing on the family crest. This specific presentation serves as a secret code between mother and son, signaling a dire emergency. Ernest accepts the task with a vow to complete it properly, allowing Eric to focus on the treasonous act he is about to commit. Eric formulates a desperate plan to breach the Blondel estate. He will forge official documents to create a pretext for entry. With the commander absent, he intends to falsify a report delivering emergency information, a stratagem that constitutes clear treason against the kingdom's knights. He recalls the suspicious circumstances of the day's meeting, which ended abruptly with Blondel leaving for an urgent matter, while no official reports were filed regarding Agnes's kidnapping or the assault on Julian. This bureaucratic silence confirms the depth of the corruption. Eric resolves that the current hierarchy, filled with cunning men who bought their positions, must collapse to be rebuilt, driving him to act according to his own sense of justice. Disguised in the uniform of a communications squad member, Eric infiltrates the Blondel estate. A servant escorts him, explaining that the master's room is on the 3rd floor and noting that security is excessively tight. The servant mentions that the floor has been cleared of other staff because the master prefers quiet. Eric maintains his cover but remains hyper-alert, knowing he is walking into the lion's den. While navigating the corridors, Eric encounters a terrified maid carrying a water pitcher. He stops her and asks about a woman brought into the manor earlier. The maid stammers and denies knowing anything, but her evident fear confirms his suspicions. Eric deduces that Agnes is being held in a secluded area, likely the cellar, as it would be the only place to hide her effectively. Eric descends to the wine cellar, where he is intercepted by a guard. Thinking quickly, he bluffs that he is there on the master's orders to retrieve wine for the woman, implying he knows about the captive. He threatens to report the guard for obstructing the master's wishes, successfully manipulating the guard into stepping aside. Inside the dim, moldy cellar, Eric spots a figure lying on the stone floor. He rushes to Agnes's side, calling her name desperately. He checks her condition, finding her unconscious with a pulse that is present but weakening. Just as he attempts to rouse her, the sharp sound of dress shoes clicking against the stone floor echoes behind him, signaling that he is no longer alone. The damp, claustrophobic confines of the wine cellar, where the silence is abruptly shattered by the ominous click of dress shoes against the stone floor. Johann Blondel, the man poised to become the next commander of the Royal Knights, descends the stairs with the casual arrogance of a predator who has cornered its prey. He looms over Eric, who crouches protectively over the unconscious form of Agnes, his body acting as a living shield between the girl and the approaching threat. Blondel sneers, dismissing the intruder as a mere rat who scurried in where he didn't belong, his voice dripping with aristocratic contempt. Without a shred of hesitation, Blondel draws his sword, the steel glinting in the dim light as he prepares to execute the witness. He lunges with lethal intent, his blade slicing through the air, forcing Eric to react instantaneously. The disguised knight pivots, barely deflecting the heavy strike with his concealed dagger, the clash of metal ringing out in the enclosed space. Blondel mocks Eric's defensive posture, ridiculing him for risking his life to protect what he calls a broken doll, dehumanizing Agnes as nothing more than an object of his greed. The disparity in their weaponry becomes immediately apparent. Eric wields a short dagger, a tool for assassination or self-defense, against a long sword wielded by a master knight. Blondel presses the advantage, his strikes heavy and precise, driving Eric back. He taunts Eric, questioning his identity and skills, noting that for a mere messenger, he moves with surprising competence. However, Blondel remains convinced of his superiority, labeling Eric's resistance as futile struggle against inevitable death. As the duel intensifies, Blondel reveals the dark truth behind the abduction. He confesses that his target was never truly the girl herself, but the Golden Princess's legacy, the rumored fortune of the Liverge family. He admits to kidnapping Agnes solely to leverage her against her father, Gerard, aiming to extract the location of the hidden wealth. He speaks of Agnes with visceral disgust, calling her filth and a hindrance, revealing that he drugged her to keep her compliant and silent. This confession acts as a catalyst for Eric. The realization that Agnes was treated as a disposable pawn in a greed-fueled scheme ignites a cold, simmering fury within him. Blondel, arrogant to the last, underestimates the man standing before him. He assumes Eric is simply a low-ranking noble or a hired hand, unaware of the monster he is provoking. He swings his sword with full force, intending to cleave Eric in two, laughing maniacally about how he will dispose of both the rat and the doll once he has what he wants. At that moment, something snaps inside Eric. The mental shackles he placed upon himself, the persona of the incompetent second son, the act of mediocrity he maintained to survive, disintegrate. He realizes that playing the fool will not save Agnes this time. Only raw, unbridled power will suffice. His demeanor shifts radically, his eyes losing their feigned innocence and hardening into the gaze of a seasoned killer. Eric steps into Blondel's range, moving with a speed that defies his previous performance. He parries the long sword not with desperation, but with calculated precision, the force of his deflection jarring Blondel's grip. The Marquis's eyes widen in shock as the rat suddenly matches his strength, the narrative shifting from a desperate defense to a dominant offense. Eric abandons the defensive. He launches a counteroffensive, his dagger moving like a blur of silver. Blondel attempts to regain control, shouting in confusion, demanding to know who this intruder really is. But Eric offers no words, only violence. He exploits the openings in Blondel's guard, slashing and striking with ruthless efficiency. The difference in weapon reach becomes irrelevant as Eric closes the distance, stepping inside the arc of the longsword to strike at close quarters. He disarms the mental fortitude of his opponent before dismantling his physical defense, shattering the illusion of the Marquis's superiority. With a final, decisive movement, Eric neutralizes the threat. He delivers a blow that sends Blondel crashing to the stone floor, the long sword clattering away uselessly. The would-be commander lies defeated, gasping for air, his pride broken along with his defense. Eric stands over him, the dark aura of his true nature swirling around him, a terrifying figure of vengeance. Eric grips the fallen noble by the collar, his voice low and dangerous, demanding the antidote for the drug administered to Agnes. Blondel, coughing blood but still spiteful, wheezes that there is no simple cure, or perhaps he refuses to give it, clinging to his malice even in defeat. He laughs, a broken, jagged sound, mocking Eric one last time before succumbing to unconsciousness from his injuries, or perhaps Eric silences him to end the prattle. Silence returns to the cellar, heavy and suffocating. Eric turns his back on the fallen enemy, his focus immediately snapping back to Agnes. He sheaths his dagger and kneels beside her, gently lifting her unconscious body into his arms. The victory brings no joy, only a grim resolve to escape this den of vipers. Holding her close, he begins the ascent, carrying the weight of his secret and the girl he swore to protect, leaving the wreckage of his incompetence behind in the dark. The episode concludes with Eric walking away from the darkness, Agnes safe in his arms, but his true face now unveiled to the shadows. The immediate aftermath of the duel leaves Johann Blondel unconscious on the cold stone floor, his ambitions silenced by the very rat he underestimated. Eric, breathing heavily from the exertion, wastes no time gloating. He sheaths his dagger and turns his sole focus to the unconscious girl lying defenseless in the gloom. He kneels beside Agnes, gently gathering her into his arms, noting with a pang of guilt how terrifyingly light she feels. He ascends the stairs from the cellar, carrying Agnes with a protective urgency. As he emerges back into the hallway, he encounters the young maid he questioned earlier. She freezes, eyes widening at the sight of the disguised messenger carrying the unconscious woman. Instead of raising the alarm, she trembles, torn between duty and fear. Eric fixes her with an intense gaze, pleading silently for her silence. In a moment of unexpected courage, the maid nods, signaling him to go, effectively becoming an accomplice to his escape. Eric navigates the opulent corridors of the Blondel estate, his senses heightened. The silence of the third floor, previously cleared for Blondel's quiet, now serves as Eric's cover. He moves swiftly, hugging the shadows, aiming for the exit. However, the estate is not entirely empty. As he turns a corner, he spots patrol guards at the far end of the hallway. Reacting instantly, he retreats, finding an alternative route through a side passage, narrowly avoiding detection. Reaching a balcony or window that offers a route to the grounds, Eric assesses the drop. It is risky, especially with Agnes in his arms, but the internal routes are compromised. He leaps, landing with practiced grace in the garden below, absorbing the impact to shield Agnes from the shock. He sprints across the manicured lawns, the darkness of the night acting as his cloak. At the perimeter, the carriage waits, tension radiating from it. Ernest, who has been keeping watch with bated breath, spots the running figure. He throws open the carriage door as Eric approaches. Eric vaults inside, shouting for Ernest to drive immediately. The carriage lurches forward, wheels clattering on the cobblestones as they put distance between themselves and the lion's den. Inside the moving carriage, the adrenaline begins to fade, replaced by a cold dread. Eric looks down at Agnes, whose face is flushed with an unnatural heat. He touches her forehead, confirming a high fever. Her breathing is shallow and ragged. The drug Blondel spoke of is not merely a sedative, it is a poison ravaging her system. Ernest, steering the horses, calls back, asking if she is safe. Eric replies that she is alive, but his voice lacks assurance. He admits he doesn't know the nature of the poison or if an antidote exists, repeating Blondel's malicious claim that there is no cure. Agnes stirs faintly, a whimper escaping her lips. In her delirium, she murmurs, "Papa," a heartbreaking sound that pierces Eric's composure. He tightens his embrace, resting his cheek against the top of her head, whispering promises that he will save her, that he will not let her die. The carriage speeds into the night, racing against time, as Eric stares into the darkness, his mind already racing through the impossible options to save the girl who has become his world.